This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Won't somebody save me from the puns that are flooding into the studio now? None of them as good as mine. I may share some of them shortly. We'll start with Roddy's. I don't know whether Special Branch were involved in this investigation, Roddy, but there's obviously a case for the fact that they should have done. And fair play to everybody asking for a cessation of all puns because they're sick of more tree jokes. It is 4 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We begin with a story that everybody's claiming an exclusive today, but we genuinely did break it at 12 noon yesterday on this programme as a consequence of my colleague Lewis Goodall's efforts. But, you know, it doesn't really matter in the great scheme of things. What matters is what happened. And it was a blunder undertaken by somebody working for the British military that triggered an epic government super injunction. The figure of £7 billion is probably much higher than what the final figure will be, but that's the amount of money that has been set aside to accommodate the 24,000 people and their dependents identified in a data breach that could have constituted a Taliban kill list. It's hard to know which element of the story has become more important in the 22 hours that have elapsed since we first started talking about it on this programme. I suspect, as the dust settles and as historians of the future begin to chronicle this extraordinary episode, the claim by Taliban spokespeople that they had the leaked list of Afghans all along may turn out to be rather pertinent. 25,000 Afghans who were applying for asylum, soldiers who had worked with the British Army. Let me say that again. Soldiers who had worked with the British Army and their family members. The Taliban claims that it had this list in 2022 and has been hunting down those named ever since. A second Taliban official telling the Telegraph that the hunt for individuals named in the document had intensified in recent months, with names handed over to border forces to stop them from leaving the country. Many only discovered they were on the list when they actually tried to cross the Taliban-controlled borders. It's a hideous, hideous story in every way, every imaginable way. But you know who really we should be focusing on today is the people who have been betrayed by this breach. Not consciously, necessarily, but we don't know. There's so much here that we don't know. There's so much that we don't know. I'm in danger of turning into Donald Rumsfeld and starting to distinguish between known knowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and all the rest of it. But we don't know what happened. And I don't think it would be appropriate to conduct a phone-in on that element of what we don't know. I do currently think it might be appropriate to conduct a phone-in on another element of what we don't know, which is why they really covered it up, because I don't believe the explanation that's been given. It doesn't justify the years that passed, effectively. I can understand why the current government didn't undo it immediately, because they had little choice but to believe the position that had been put in place by the previous government, and examining that properly. Probably, and again, I'm open to correction on this from people who know more than I do, but I don't know who would be in that category, given the secretive nature of everything. You'd need to conduct a proper inquiry. You'd need to have a proper review. You couldn't just leave it up to a court when government lawyers have argued a position very, very, very strongly, and a court has agreed with that position. I don't know that another government can just come in and strike a red line through what had previously been decided. But I don't know. And you know, it's unfortunate in many ways that the government changed, and many people will find their position changes as a consequence. And maybe I'm guilty of that myself. I don't think so. But I don't know what else you can do but stick with the original ruling until you've been given pertinent reasons to get rid of it. They probably could have moved quicker. Shall we leave it at that? 8 minutes after 10 is the time. But the biggest thing we don't know is what happened. So I will allow myself a moment of speculation, because it is usually the case that Occam's razor kicks in at times like this, and the simplest explanation is usually the one that turns out to be the truth. Or you can marry Occam's razor to a little bit of Sherlock Holmes, and once you have eliminated the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. But we don't know what is impossible here. If it was deliberately done by an individual member of the military for reasons I can hear all sorts of theories percolating through the minds of people who may be better informed or closer to the military establishment than I am. Might there be people on this list that know things that might be embarrassing to members of the British military? We were there for 20 years. These are largely, mostly men that fought alongside us. Or does Occam's razor take you where it currently takes me, which is to the conclusion that it was human error? We've all been there. I mean, it is extraordinary that such sensitive information could be on the internet at all, really, not on some sort of encrypted site. And they were using Excel spreadsheets. I read inappropriately. They should have been using specifically built software. But we've all had experiences of specifically, well, not all of us, but you know that specifically built software doesn't always do the job as well as the much more popular and generic stuff. So somebody sitting in an office somewhere, and the longer you do a job, the more inured you become to its sensitivity and unique status. Most obviously, I suppose, emergency services, stuff that would have the rest of us absolutely reeling and retching in horror. Is now the daily experience of people working in the emergency services, and the longer you do it for, the more inured you become to the unique status of what it is that you're doing. And the same is true of almost everything else. So if you're dealing with this sort of sensitive data every day, then you will be your consciousness of how sensitive it is will diminish, and so you will not be as careful as you should be. And that, of course, means that it is either a decision to leak it or an accidental keystroke, an accidental button being pressed. But again, I don't know that matters much yet. I think the government should tell us. I think the government should tell us what happened with as much detail as they reasonably can within the parameters of secrecy. But given that they've ridden roughshod over the trust that those parameters of secrecy demand, it puts them in a very difficult situation. Jack puts it best: never assign to malice what can be explained through incompetence. Never assign to malice what can be explained through incompetence. Ben Wallace making no apology for the Afghan injunction. That's the nature of politicians in general, not all of them, but generally speaking. Never explain, never apologise. Certainly anybody who was adjacent to Boris Johnson's various political moments would subscribe to the never explain, never apologise school of thought. It's a case for arguing that the current government explains and apologises too much. But that's not the conversation we're having today. The conversation we're having today is why you think they did it. Why you think they did it. Why they did it for so long. And I've got a theory that I invite you to examine. I think they did it because of the way the narrative on immigration in general has been permitted to develop in this country. In fact, even that's a euphemism. It hasn't just been permitted to develop. People have seized with glee the increasingly rabid demonisation of refugees and asylum seekers, because there would be no more worthy applicant than somebody who fought alongside British soldiers against the Taliban. Am I suffering from a surfeit of naivety and patriotic compassion when I suggest to you that even 2 years ago, even 3 years ago, certainly 5 years ago, and most definitely a decade ago, there wouldn't be a debate here. There wouldn't be room for words like smuggle and migrant in this story. It would be a tale about the duty of care we have to men who risk their lives to help us fight against the murderous extremists of the Taliban. It would have been simple. And now I'm reading that the government's worried that there might be more riots, more Farage-flavoured riots in the summer if the anger about the fact that we've brought these people here secretly is allowed to ferment. And unfortunately, I can understand why they are making that point. But the question of why they covered it up in the first place, for me, at the moment, leads back to the same place. I think they sat around, I don't know who was sat around the table, but when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever you are left with, however improbable, must be the truth. We know that the list was in the public space. We know that the Taliban claim they've had it since 2022. I'm not suggesting anybody should trust the word of the Taliban, but their version of events seems to me to be feasible. The government, for the first 2 months of that injunction, may well have believed that it wasn't widespread enough, that it hadn't spread widely enough to make attempts to keep it secret pointless. But at the end of that 2 months, I think they must have realised. I think they covered it up because the Tories created a population that was so enraged, with the help of Nigel Farage and his mates, created a population that was so enraged by the existence of any refugee, any asylum seeker. I think they covered it up because they didn't want to be the people that had to tell the public we were going to look after 24,000 people who had potentially risked their lives to look after our boys in Afghanistan. And I don't normally use language like that. Our boys. I think sometimes when we over-sentimentalise military matters, we do a disservice to the military. So we somehow denude them of humanity and instead turn them into sort of icons or fetishised figures. But it works for me today. 24,000 Afghans looking after our boys in Afghanistan should have a red carpet rolled out for them, shouldn't they? Shouldn't they? Mike disagrees. He's been in touch to say, who cares about the rights of terrorists? Not me. So something in the phrase, soldiers who fought alongside the British military against the Taliban, has Mike thinking terrorists. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Mike wasn't born that stupid. He's been created by the rhetoric of many, many Tories and people like Nigel Farage. All asylum seekers are dodgy. They're all criminals. They're all terrorists. Mike believes it. So how can the Tory party turn around a couple of years ago and say we're bringing 24,000 people to this country, the same people that we've been bleating and whining and moaning and complaining about since we shut down the safe and legal routes for people from the Middle East to come to this country? Extraordinary and shameful. And Brexit Britain. It's who we are. So what do you reckon? Have you got a better reason? Why do you think they covered it up? 0345 6060 973. If not because Rishi Sunak didn't want to be the Prime Minister and Ben Wallace didn't want to be the Defence Secretary and Grant Shapps was there for a couple of weeks. They didn't want to be the people to say, we've got 24,000 Afghans that we've put into potential danger and we're going to bring them all here. Because the atmosphere surrounding small boats, but more pertinently refuge. Remember, we live in a country where a woman who encouraged an actual pogrom against these people, against men who may even have been part of this evacuation process, has somehow become a cause célèbre among the right-wing media. Imagine somebody, if Twitter had existed in 1930s Germany, somebody tweeted "burn the Jews," and Daily Telegraph columnists queued up to defend her and claim that she'd been a victim of two-tier justice or a victim of some sort of miscarriage. Not only that, but she was identifying the buildings in which the Jews could be found and encouraging people to set fire to them as mobs rampaged through the streets of our towns. And she's become a cause célèbre. And against that backdrop, just a year previously, you reckon this government, the last government, would have come out and said, everybody calm down, we found 24,000, they're not dodgy, they're not the ones we've demonised, they're not the ones you need to be worried about, they're not the ones that Mike thinks are terrorists, and they're not the ones that someone will pop up tomorrow to tell you we're all sex offenders. They're real people who fought alongside or helped British military during a 20-year campaign in a country we should probably never have gone near. And now we have to protect them from the people we failed to defeat. So, why do you think they covered it up? 0345 6060 973. And why wouldn't we roll out a red carpet for these people? What's changed in this country on your watch that has turned us into a population that would not welcome these people, that even today is being warned about potential riots because we may have to house people that helped our soldiers fight against the Taliban? Why wouldn't we roll out a red carpet? Why wouldn't we look after them? Why wouldn't we do our most basic and simple duty? The kind of men that talk about Judeo-Christian values will not be talking about Judeo-Christian values today because they know what a Judeo-Christian value, or to be fair, an Abrahamic religion would teach about helping people in this sort of situation. So what's changed? 0345 6060 973. Question number 1, why do you think they covered it up? Tell me I'm wrong. Or indeed tell me I'm right. And question number 2, why on earth has the narrative, the discourse surrounding this story already lurched into language like smuggling and migrants, when in fact it's allies and duty that we should be talking about? What's happened to us that allows this story to be turned into the toxic poison I'm reading in most of my newspapers today, and which is leading government ministers to probably rightly conclude that it could lead to more riots? Doing right by people who did their duty by us could lead to riots on the street of this country. Riddle me that. 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 10. Cover up after leak risked lives of 100,000 Afghans. How does the next line of this story in any decent person's mind not become, and of course we have to look after them? They helped us, we jeopardised their safety. But there could be riots on the streets of this country this summer because the government elected to do so secretly. The last government elected to do so secretly. Just unravel it for me if you can. 0345 6060 973. You may not agree with the 2 questions I've chosen to lead us into this, which are currently, why do you think they covered it up? And why would we not roll out the red carpet? That's what I want you to tell me. But if you think there's a different or a better way into the issue, into the unravelling of this Gordian knot, then as ever, it's your programme as much as mine. So feel free to come at it from a different angle. Martin is in Kensington. Martin, what would you like to say?
I would say on your point number 1, James, it's not a cover-up. When a data breach like that happens, you have to assume that bad actors will have access to the data, but you also have to do as much as you possibly can to prevent anyone else finding out about it. And, there's 18,000 plus names on that list, and they're in a foreign country which you have no access to, and you're trying, as a third nation, trying to help all those people that are potentially affected and that could be killed by the Taliban. And we know what retribution the Taliban does.
But so we also know that they've had the list all along.
Yeah, you have to assume
which is what the review found.
And
the review, the review's purview would go back to roughly 2 months after the original injunction was introduced. So I don't know that we'll ever know for sure, Martin, but it seems to me pretty likely that politicians involved in extending the injunction to a super injunction and turning it into, an absolutely unprecedented exercise of what I have to call the deep state, even though it's usually a phrase used by conspiracy theorists and idiots. It is absolutely unprecedented, and the reason for doing it would not be simply to protect people who no longer needed protecting, because either the threat had passed or the information was already in the hands of the enemies. The bit that does the circle you can't square is the fact that overnight they've said, oh yeah, all the reasons we gave for that injunction are no longer true.
It's now 2 years down the road, and
there's still people there.
There's still people there, but I'm pretty sure
they're still at risk according to the original rationale. And yet the court, when the injunction was lifted, it was lifted because they said all of the arguments that were used to justify the original super injunction are not true.
So what does that tell us? That probably tells us that we've done an awful lot of work to extract those people from Afghanistan.
But there's lots still there.
Of course. I know that, but we can't know that, can we? We're not being told, and the government certainly won't tell us. So we have to assume, with the best intent, that that's absolutely right. The reason for that injunction no longer exists, and the logical reason, using Occam's razor, would be that they've managed to extract or protect as many people as they possibly can. That is not the reason given, either by or to Mr. Justice
Chamberlain. He described the long-running and unprecedented order giving rise to serious free speech concerns. He described a scrutiny vacuum. He said the gagging order had the effect of completely shutting down the ordinary mechanisms of accountability which operate in a democracy. At an earlier hearing, one of the judge asked whether or not he was going bonkers when he was presented with the government's arguments, and they are the arguments that you are pretty much parroting now. And actually parroting's not fair, reiterating. So even the judges sitting in the cases would disagree with your analysis.
Okay, that's kind of fair enough. But I think you always have to give the benefit of the doubt when people's lives are at risk. And whilst we might like to get a bit tinfoily about it,
2 years, mate.
I know it is a long time.
And all of the judges involved are swimming in the opposite direction to you, and all of the journalists involved. I mean, that is the trump card, I think. You've identified early doors, first call. The trump card is, and the card they will all continue to play, is that we were doing it to protect these people. But the secrecy is unprecedented. The argument is a busted flush, not least because the Taliban have had the information all along. You could find it online, I discovered yesterday, once the injunction had been lifted without too much difficulty. Sarah works with Afghan refugees. I won't tell you exactly where, but she tells me that the data breach has been an open secret since 2022. The Taliban were already targeting people on it. Many have been murdered. Those who were applying for sanctuary in the UK and who had worked with British forces have had to flee across the channel in small boats as they couldn't wait in Afghanistan for this secretive scheme to unfold. 95% of them were granted asylum by the Home Office as they could prove without doubt that they'd worked for the military or in embassy support services. The UK has failed these brave men and women so badly. So the question remains, Martin's trump card notwithstanding, and it's a pretty flimsy trump card, but it's the only one they've got. Why would they cover it up? And the answer is, for me at least, hideously ugly and blindingly obvious. If you, as a member of the last government, dedicated enormous amounts of effort to trying to persuade people or buying into the widespread demonisation of all refugees, then you lost the power, or you didn't think you had the ability to encourage the British public to distinguish between people who had every right to be here and the ones that they were trying to set fire to last summer. But I would like to be wrong. Gus is in Portland. Gus, what would you like to say?
Hey, boss, how you doing?
I'm good, mate. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I did 5 tours in Afghanistan, and I worked with these people very, very closely. And they're genuine, honest, upstanding people. And here in Portland, we've got about 2,000.
Have you?
And they've really integrated. And people help them out. They work doing sort of local jobs, cleaning up. And they're very welcome here. We need to support these people.
Why do you think we're not? Why do you think the narrative automatically moves to words like smuggling and migrant and riots?
No, I don't know. These are upstanding people with families. They're very decent.
We know the massive majority of refugees and asylum seekers, wherever they've come from, are upstanding people, are very decent. And I know you know that. And I mean, in this particular case, you will know individuals who are affected by this story, whether you know it for sure or not. The law of averages dictates that you will know these people. You will have encountered them. They will have helped you in your 5 tours of duty in Afghanistan. So why would we not just roll out the red carpet?
I don't know. I go and see them regularly. And the community here leans in. They've got kids. They need stuff. And they need nappies and
I wonder how widespread that is, Gus, because you're never going to read it in the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph or hear about it on certain radio shows. I wonder how widespread it is, actually, for communities to be upholding the values that you fought for in Afghanistan with the people that helped you fight when they come here seeking asylum and seeking refuge. I wonder how widespread it is. I wonder whether there is a counter-narrative that just never gets told unless people like you end up on shows like this.
Yeah, I think so. But they come and clean gardens up. They come and help old people out. They're proper upstanding people, the Afghanistanis. That's for sure. And this is really close to my heart.
I can tell it is, and everyone listening will know why. And it's a valuable contribution that I'm very grateful for. And yet, you know, and I know that you stick the figure of £7 billion in a headline, and people will get angry. I don't think journalists have much choice, because that is the sum that has been earmarked to handle the fallout. But there are people who will focus more upon that than they will upon the reasons why Gus takes this all so personally. If you'd been there, and these people had helped you, and you then gave their names potentially to the Taliban, well, you did. You gave their names to the Taliban. Then you've got to get them out. And you've got to make it a point of pride for the British public. You've got to make it a duty of care issue. But something's happened to this country in the last 10 years that means the last government felt that they couldn't. And the current one also is not embracing the I don't want to say the positive, but embracing the notion that this is both the right and the admirable thing to do, not something that needs to be covered up and kept secret from the public. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:33 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Remember, writes Chris in Cumbria, how this country treated the Gurkhas. Are you really surprised that we would treat Afghans so shabbily? Scott says, this story proves, James, that for some people in this country there are no true asylum seekers. These Afghans are the best example of an asylum seeker, yet the hate is still there. It's deeply disheartening, to be honest. It really is. But is it true? I don't know how you do this. I almost want to ask a version of this question every day, but we don't keep track. We don't have a sort of shared diary. I mean, it wasn't always this bad. You and me live in a country where somebody posting on social media that they want a hotel full of refugees to be set fire to, while people were rampaging through the streets of our towns trying to set fire to hotels full of refugees, including Afghans. We only recently ended up living in a country where someone who did that would become some form of folk hero for Daily Telegraph journalists, would become a cause célèbre on Elon Musk's Twitter. And indeed, would we all still be using a social media platform owned by a man who gives Nazi salutes at public meetings? You see what I mean about the madness and the incremental nature of the madness, and the way that all the really extreme stuff ends up disappearing into the rearview mirror. And then a story like this comes along, and you don't know how the country would have handled it in previous years. I mean, before Brexit unleashed a huge legitimisation of base and vicious racism, would we have turned our back on Afghan allies in this way? Or would a government, a right-wing government, championing the notion of stopping the boats, spending millions and millions and millions of pounds on deporting precisely nobody to Rwanda? Would they have been too frightened of their own propaganda and their own racist politics to actually announce that we've got 24,000 people who we desperately need to help now because we have endangered their very lives? It's extraordinary. And now the coverage I'm reading is about how people worried about housing and the cost of it all might riot this summer. And I wish it wasn't plausible. Key paragraph in the Times coverage is here. The MOD claimed for 2 years that the security risk to Afghans implicated in the breach justified the unprecedented gagging order, but it was able to abandon its injunction at short notice, a U-turn apparently at the flourish of a pen. It now cites a risk review concluding the Taliban probably already has the information or is unlikely to target the subjects of the leak. But it gives scant explanation of why this so drastically contradicts its long-held position that there was serious risk. This raises the question, did the risk ever truly justify the secrecy? And that question gives rise in turn to many uncomfortable follow-ups. What exactly prompted this extraordinary change of heart? And where is the intelligence? And here's the crucial point. Most uncomfortable of all, as time went on, that's the crucial sentence, as time went on, because Martin's argument at the top of the show was pertinent for a while. But as time went on, is it possible that a legal tool put in place to protect life became a mechanism to spare the government's blushes? I'd go further. to spare the government the horror of having to suddenly backtrack on the deliberate and determined demonisation of all asylums, seekers and refugees on their own watch. Jason is in Nottingham. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good morning.
Hello,
to you. There's an exact, almost identical comparison here. 21 years ago, Joanna Lumley ran a campaign to protect the Gurkhas and give Gurkhas who fought by the side of British soldiers the same residence rights in Britain as British soldiers and Commonwealth fighters that fought in the same battles alongside them.
Yes.
At that time, there was huge public support for that. Our boys fighting alongside our boys, as you said earlier.
Yes.
10 years ago, there was a massive campaign led by the likes of Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Nigel Farage, alienating anybody who's not British. And that's what caused Brexit. And this last decade, as you said earlier, it's legitimised the hatred of anybody who's not white British. And that is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. The government covered it up because they were afraid of the backlash. Sort of a few years on from the Brexit referendum, when legitimisation of racism was absolutely fine, and it's been getting worse and worse these last 10 years.
Do you think it had to get worse and worse? I'm fascinated. I mean, it's a bit of an academic question, but could they have put the genie back in the bottle in 2017, 2016, and actually stopped it from escalating into where we are now, with people actually trying to set fire to refugees in their beds?
No, I don't, because there's enough mics out there in the world that will believe anything that they're told by certain newspapers, well, I call them newspapers, pieces of rag, and certain so-called politicians. They've had it drummed into them day after day after day for 2 years before the referendum. And it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
And it just shifted. I mean, the reason I ask, and perhaps I'm a little bit less bleak in my analysis than you, is that it was Polish lorry drivers that they were being turned against, not Afghan asylum seekers. And yet the hop, skip and a jump from one to the other was over in a nanosecond, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was electricians and plumbers, I think,
right.
was the first ones. Yeah, electricians and plumbers were the first ones to alienate. They're dragging down wages, they're the enemy. And it's just got worse and worse. The rhetoric from elected officials, elected politicians, including the poor lady, the woman that's in prison right now for threatening to burn down buildings.
Encouraging other people to burn down buildings.
Yeah. At a time of high ferocity across the country, and you can absolutely nail it. 20 years ago, Joanna Lumley had massive public support across the country.
I think you're right. That's what I mean about this, the collective diary. We don't have a collective consciousness or a collective memory that we could just punch in the data and say what would have happened then, or vice versa. If Joanna Lumley were to launch her campaign, what would happen now? But I think we both feel that you would get two very, very different outcomes to two outwardly very similar stories at two very different points in our history, in our time, just 10, 20 years apart. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe it's time to get Joanna Lumley on for another full disclosure and ask her that exact question.
I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but the experience of many of the Gurkhas, even after they came here, was actually suboptimal, because once the spotlight moves away, I'm afraid it's a truth of politics, whoever is in power, that sometimes the urgency a politician feels to need to address an issue diminishes as the spotlight fades or moves. But I mean, it would just be, I'd have thought, second nature to us 10 years ago to roll out the red carpet for these people. The Taliban, Kabul has fallen. Taliban are back in charge. The mission failed. What do we owe to the people who helped us fight? I mean, a life, surely, here. I don't know. Maybe you disagree. Mike still thinks they're all terrorists. 10:41 is the time. If you're wondering who Jason was referring to, that was an early entry for Idiot's Corner on the programme this morning. Joe is in Forest Hill. Joe, what do you reckon?
Morning, James.
Hello, Joe.
Quick side note about the Gurkhas, if I may.
Of course.
I worked in the construction industry a long while ago, and a lot of the security guards in the construction industry are Gurkhas.
Okay.
And they are the most kind-hearted, honest, hard-working people you've ever met. Ready, wear their hearts on their sleeves, down-to-earth people, and look how long they suffered. I think what's going on with this is just indicative of what went on the whole time the Tories were in power. we could go back to the beginning, or we could just look at what happened during COVID. Whether it was parties, they got caught having parties, and then all of a sudden we saw Keir Starmer having a curry and a beer, and we was made to believe that maybe we need to riot or something, you know.
Without breaking any rules, of course. I know you know that.
Of course, yeah, of course. But what about the money? What about the loans that went to mates? What about the Monet lady? What was her name? I can't remember. Where's all that money gone?
But so I think I know who you're talking about, and there's a court case that is unconcluded, so we won't dive too hard into that. But I quite like your analysis of this just being another example of what we were detailing on a daily basis on this programme until a year ago. Just incompetent. The only mystery was what was incompetence and what was corruption.
And they knew that they weren't going to make the next general election, and they knew that all of this mess would be happening.
Just keep a lid on it. Keep a lid on it until the election, and let the next lot deal with the fallout.
Exactly. And what would the fallout be? Would be division amongst society. Would be the rich are getting richer, the richest getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. It would mean schools are dilapidated and falling apart. It would mean hospitals you're waiting for 7 hours just to see a nurse.
I mean, you don't need to do this. You don't need to draw your net wide, cast your net wider, but it's interesting that you do, because the other thing that they'd know the next government had to deal with was the cost of housing. When the truth comes out, it's going to be the Labour government that has to deal with all the very carefully cultivated anger about how much it's going to cost to look after these people to whom we owe a debt of honour. But just don't mention that, please, because it won't make for dangerous headlines for a Labour government. I mean, it's a compelling analysis just to see it all as part of a much, much bigger picture.
Being told about 7 billion, but what happened with that 7 billion? What cat got fat under that 7 billion? How come? Yeah, but
I like your facility with language. What cat got fat? I like that.
Yeah,
but you're right. You know, we read about all these numbers. We read about the asylum hotels, and we don't read much about the people who actually end up with all the money. Whereas we're supposed to believe that it's all being funneled directly into the pockets of people who've come here from Afghanistan on a small boat. I mean, it's a bit of a rabbit hole once you start on it, but of a positive nature. It's all there. Just get out. The prisons were the same, weren't they, Joe? Do you remember? They knew that they were going to have to release more and more prisoners because their own ministers told them, but Rishi Sunak just kept a lid on it until the mystery of why he called an early election becomes less of a mystery with every passing month, doesn't it?
The prisons have become such a joke that prisoners were filming videos with staff. Prisons are going viral on social media because of what state they've been left in. We are meant to believe that these people are going to be rehabilitated in that section where there's more drugs in prison than there is in public sometimes.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? You suck huge sums of money out of the public sector for 14 years straight, and then when the next lot come in and get charged with trying to fix the mess that you've left, you just sign up all your mates in journalism to pretend that it's all the fault of the people with the mops and the brooms. And this, perhaps, under Joe's pretty winning analysis, this would just be another example of that, because the crucial question is, as time went on, is it possible that a legal tool put in place to protect life became a mechanism to spare the government's blushes? And, it's pretty hard not to answer yes to that. And then the question is, why would the government have been so desperate to keep this quiet? And the answer is because of what they had done. You know, this is the government of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. This is a government of Rishi Sunak and Grant Shapps, what they had done, of Honest Bob Jenrick. This is around the time that Honest Bob Jenrick was ordering people to paint over murals at asylum processing centres for unaccompanied child asylum seekers, quite possibly from Afghanistan. Imagine Honest Bob Jenrick having to stand up and explain. Was he immigration minister? Having to stand up and explain, well, we're inviting 24,000 people here and their dependents, potentially, because we have put their lives in danger. And by the way, when they get here, if they happen to be unaccompanied children, don't worry, because they won't be able to see any pictures of Mickey Mouse as they make their way through the concrete jungle that they now call home, because I've ordered them to be painted over. I'm Honest Bob Jenrick. Watch my selfies. Oh, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but other journalists, cleverer journalists than me, decided to put a Freedom of Information request in on prosecutions on the tube after that clown made a film of himself accosting fare dodgers. It turns out prosecutions are the highest they've been since 2019. But don't expect him to correct the record anytime soon, any more than you can expect him to turn up in Dover with a tin of turpentine to let those bloody cartoons once again appear on the walls and provide a tiny modicum, a tiny scintilla of comfort to some of the most desperate and broken children on the planet. It's 10:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And Joe set my little grey cells whirring, actually, because what you need to do is see this in the context of who was making decisions at the time, I think. Do you remember what Dominic Raab did when Kabul fell? He was Foreign Secretary. Do you remember? I mean, I should probably apologise. Do we need trigger warnings if we're going to remind people of Dominic Raab's existence, Eleanor? Do you think we should have some sort of warning? Because lots of people will have forgotten that Dominic Raab exists, and that will have improved their lives immeasurably. Honest Bob Jenrick, I guess, is still in politics, still in Parliament. So we can't necessarily sort of consign him to the dustbin of history yet. But Dominic Raab was Foreign Secretary. This is the guy that was Brexit Secretary before discovering the importance of trade between Calais and Dover. Dominic Raab then became Foreign Secretary, because who wouldn't promote somebody who didn't know how important trade was between Calais and Dover while encouraging an entire population to vote to leave the European Union? He was Foreign Secretary when Kabul fell, which means, I think, if my timings are correct, it was during Boris Johnson's period as Prime Minister. He was Foreign Secretary when Kabul fell, and he stayed on holiday. When it emerged that he'd actually gone paddleboarding at a crucial moment, he told lies about the sea being closed. At least they appear to be lies when you look at what meteorology experts in the area said about the relevant days. Some of us bothered to find out. So that's who's in charge. That is the calibre of human being behind some of these decisions. The bloke that painted over the murals of cartoon characters because unaccompanied child asylum seekers get it too easy. The bloke who stayed on holiday when Kabul fell, and the people who had helped our soldiers for 20 years would have been in abject peril and deep danger. They'd have been despairing for their very lives. But the Foreign Secretary stayed on holiday and told what are almost certainly big pork pies about the sea being closed. And who here hasn't seen a closed sea on their holidays? These are the people that were in charge. Dominic Cummings, while we're on the subject, the bloke who looked you in the eye and told you that he'd broken lockdown rules he helped make because he needed to test his eyes by driving 40 miles with his kid in the back of the car. And the notion, the nature of lies, self-interest and self-protection among these people was absolutely epic. So you look me in the eye and tell me, I just can't believe they would have done this in order to avoid political embarrassment or to avoid the absolutely irrefutable evidence that the tinderbox of racism and hatred that they had helped to create was likely to be ignited by their own incompetence and actions. Gavin's in Hull. Gavin, what do you reckon?
Morning, James. How you doing?
Very well. Well, I'm pretty cross, actually, to be honest with you, but it's a figure. Yeah, I mean, I think we can all safely say no one responsible for this will feel any heat whatsoever, but we live in hope.
Yeah,
go on.
I agree. So, mainly, I completely agree with your general summation is that it's lack of sophistication in the media, that there's only two types of people. There's good British-born people and evil foreigners, and that's it, and it doesn't matter what they've done for us and things like that. I think that's completely right.
Yeah.
I think, seeing as the show today seems to be about painting a picture and trying to put the bits together and, see what's going on, there's two parts of it that, rang in my mind when you were on the radio. One was the long-lasting damage this will do to our military, in that we've basically hoisted a flag saying we'll be friends when it suits us, and then we're going to throw you under the bus.
Well, I think the earlier caller reminded us that we kind of did that to the Gurkhas, and if it hadn't been for the intervention of Joanna Lumley... I agreed
with that completely, and I thought the treatment of the Gurkhas was pretty disgusting. However, I don't believe, I'm not an expert, I don't believe we left them behind enemy lines.
No, that's a good point. It was more a case of the life they were leading rather than the life they were risking, or the life that could have been lost. But there is a line I dug out, actually, after that call, which is pertinent. Our campaign had moral right on our side Joanna Lumley's statement said, and the vast majority of the British public wanted the government to amend the law to allow Gurkhas to settle in the UK. How things change. But this line resonated with me. Debts of honour are not easy to translate or quantify into pounds and pence. And some MPs have criticised our campaign for not considering the potential financial impact on the Exchequer. And you fast forward to today, and it is indeed the financial impact on the Exchequer, just 14 years later, almost to the day, that dominates almost all of the headlines. How the world turns, eh? Anyway, I interrupted you. Sorry, Gavin.
No. I think I don't really like the word honour, because on the global and historical, it's led to as many bad things as good things when honour's offended. However, I think in this case, we should be concerned about our perceived honour. You know, you do things that are expensive, but the right thing to do. You do things that are difficult, but are the right things to do. And I think by treating the Afghans that fought alongside us, to diminish what they did is to diminish what every British soldier did over there, because they were a collective team. They were a force that fought together. And to say that these people didn't matter enough to be taken care of because they were essentially progressing our interests, looking after our security abroad, and, you know, all these things. You know, could have a whole debate about the validity of the war, but the whip
of the rightness of the war. But that's not the point, is it? It's about the people that helped us and what we owe to them. Do you, I mean, can you see past? Can you see any argument, explanation, rationale that doesn't include the widespread demonisation of refugees that we've seen since? And
I would have to raise it incredibly carefully, because I hate conspiracy theories.
Sure.
I hate anything that paints the military as a whole in a negative. I'm fully supportive of our military. Unfortunately, I always feel a bit ashamed. I'm the first in 5 generations not to serve.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
You know, going back to great-grandfather lost in the First World War, and before that, now I'm in my 40s, I've always felt a bit of a shame. I sort of feel like I should have done a little bit. Yeah. But, you know, life gets in the way. Now, I won't state any of this as fact or things I know, just things I've seen.
Yes.
When the news broke, and I believe, again, this was months ago, so my memory is fading, there was a story about an Afghan unit referred to as the 333s, I believe. Again, I'm not an expert on this, who were Afghan nationals trained to British Special Forces standards, there or thereabouts. And the story was that these guys had been left behind.
Okay.
Just left behind. Now, at the same time, and again, this is where I don't like the conspiracy, but I am aware of the stories. It's been on mainstream news. Channel 4 covered some of it. I've seen reports by Al Jazeera, and I've also seen complementary stories about the Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan, and they've got legal proceedings. This sounds... I don't want to sound like a nutbag, but...
Get on with it!
Basically, I think some of those Afghan units saw some very dirty things. Isolated...
That people in the Ministry of Defence may not want ever to see the light of day. I've heard this explained.
It smacks of conspiracy
I alluded to it very loosely at the top of the hour, actually, and it does. But as you say, there are grounds for holding that suspicion or worrying about that possible explanation. And that is why I also make the point that when a vacuum exists, anything can move into it. And governments, plural, including the current one, are currently electing not to provide more information, not to provide more clarity, where, as many newspapers at the more responsible end of the market ask this morning, is the intelligence? Where is the intelligence with regard to the potential U-turn? But where, I would ask, is the information about how this happened in the first place? So I think you're perfectly entitled to ask that question, Gavin, and if they don't answer it, then we're perfectly entitled to speculate on what possible answers might be. Kat's in Doncaster, last word on this. What's it going to be, Kat?
So I want to talk about the movement of the Overton window in order to make things acceptable. We have seen so many examples how it's lurched to the right. Now, I'm not an expert in the military in any way, but I feel that
Nor's the bloke who leaked the details, and he works there.
Well, I mean, yeah. So the narrative that we've got at the moment is that it's migrants, it's people coming over, non-white people mostly is the way that it's being portrayed. Because of the way the Overton window has moved, what's become more important to politicians is public perception and media than, I think the word I would use rather than honour might be integrity. Integrity is not being used in... Sorry.
Well, even honesty, actually, because if for example, an asylum seeker commits a crime, the idea that provides any rationale or basis to attack all asylum seekers or to generalise in that way, a bit like...
Or to burn Filipinos' houses in Ballymena.
Filipino houses in Ballymena. And rather than call it out constantly, you've got Farage essentially saying, well, I understand why they're doing it, and you've got other politicians essentially talking about, or commentators certainly, about legitimate concerns. If one man commits a crime, there is nothing legitimate about punishing people who had absolutely nothing to do with it. And that's Overton window stuff, you're right. That's 1930s Germany stuff.
The point I want to make about the Sunak government, they knew that this was happening, and as far as we know now, they also knew that the Afghan and the Taliban had the information.
It looks that way.
There was an opportunity to talk about nuance in migration. There was an opportunity to shift the Overton window back for a society that we need migration. We need people to come over here.
If 75-80% of people coming over on the small boats are, when their applications are actually processed, found to have a real and just cause for being here, they can't afford to do that.
I've worked with migrant families as part of Doncaster Council. I've worked with people who are trying to get bigger houses, people do come over and want more.
Of course.
But they can't get it. It's not, the narrative that people are getting all of this stuff is just not true. And until we change the way that we're talking about migration, I'm terrified of what this means, both politically and economically, for our country.
Well, and socially. I know you mean that to be included as well, but you'd probably file it under politically. But even I was slightly taken aback to see the word riots appear in headlines almost as soon as the super injunction was lifted. But, of course, I suppose the people who worry that there might be riots are very conscious of what the people who caused the last lot of riots are like, what they do, who they trust, where they get their, quotes, news from. Spoiler alert, alleged sex traffickers and rapists. That's who they go to for their news, that they then peddle on social media in full knowledge of what the response is likely to be. And when a member of the public gets jailed for joining in, they have little choice but to pretend that she's some sort of folk hero or cause célèbre, when what she's done is essentially cheer on pogromists and suggest new targets for them. That's where we are now. And this story is part of that narrative, as Kat has done a much better job of explaining than I'd managed to do. Thank you. It's 11:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 5 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. PMQs on the way at 12. Hard to guess what it will be today. I mean, one story dominating news coverage effectively, but I don't know necessarily that it offers any opportunities for Kemi Badenoch to try to score points off Keir Starmer. There'll be inflation news, bad news on the inflation front. That will no doubt provide her with some weaponry. Aggie Chambre will be joining us just before 12 to have a little contemplate of what is likely to come up. And then a couple of things that I have mentioned to you in the past. One is a new book, or a newish book, by Dr. Eliza Filby called Inheritocracy. It's time to talk about the bank of mum and dad. We've alluded to it on the programme. In fact, I think I must have known about the book when I said to you that would be a good name for a book, because someone rang in and said it. And said, we need to talk about the inheritocracy. And I thought that'd be a good name for a book, but it was already a book at that point. So I think it must have just registered somewhere. I must have filed it away in my subconscious somewhere, but we'll find out more about that, because I don't know about you, but as you think about the way society is likely to go and you listen to people like Gary Stevens and wonder whether we are marching lemming-like towards cliffs the likes of which we haven't seen since times of feudalism, and even those of us who think that we are lucky or privileged or wealthy could end up being mere fodder for a growing, the amount of wealth they possess is growing, the number of people in that class is staying more or less the same, then inheritocracy could be a crucial part of that process. The distinction between people that are likely to inherit a few quid and people who are not will be the next chapter in the tale of property ownership, won't it? And At 12:30, we're going to meet someone I mentioned to you yesterday, a young man who believes that his sister died in large part as a consequence of their own mother's scepticism of conventional medicine, or medicine, as we should correctly call it. And it was a woman who was very active. I mentioned her to you yesterday in the anti-vax movement, one of the people that reached almost immediately for Nazi parallels and was comparing doctors and nurses to concentration camp guards and the likes of it. And one of her children has subsequently died from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and her brother believes that the refusal of cancer treatment was down to their mother's influence. Gabriel Shemirani will be joining me just after 12:30 today to tell us more. He's the twin, in fact, of Paloma, the poor young woman who passed away. It is 8 minutes after 11, and we're going to talk about something completely different. Okay, so this doesn't happen very often. I don't mean that in an arrogant way. It probably is quite arrogant, actually. But where do you stand on the tree? About halfway up, usually. But no, seriously, the tree what got chopped down, and the sentence that has now been handed down to the men what did it. Two men who, don't really look... I mean, is it fair, can you say that they look... I mean, they were described as moronic. And if you were to consult central casting for a couple of people to play a couple of morons, you wouldn't be disappointed if these characters turned up. Can you say that? Are you allowed to say that? No, probably not. It's a good job I didn't. So you know the sentence has been handed down of the two men who chopped down the tree that sat in the Sycamore Gap, and you probably know that they are quite severe sentences. 4 years and 3 months each. I'll say that again. 4 years and 3 months each. They won't serve that. Nobody serves their full term if they keep their nose clean in prison. But still, you can only talk about the sentence that has been handed down. They chopped it down in a matter of minutes, having driven under the cover of darkness from Carlisle to the site next to Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, and they even kept a wedge of the trunk, which has never been recovered as a trophy, and were said in court to be loving it when news of the felling made headlines. When they were asked for their motivation behind the felling, one of them said it came down to drunken stupidity, adding one of their lawyers said, there is no better explanation than that. So, you know this tree now. You may not have known it before. Iconic is an overused word, isn't it? And yet this tree was iconic. It's been really interesting to hear people. Cy King, the surviving hairy biker, spoke very powerfully. I really, really admire him, and I really admired Dave Myers as well, his old mate. I loved that show, but they did like the best people on television, like the best communicators. They moved far beyond their purview. I always call it the Fred Dibner effect. Some people whose just natural warmth and charm and passion for their subject reaches far beyond the subject and sort of touches you in ways that only very, very few television presenters can do. And he spoke about the tree in incredibly emotional terms. And my slightly lazy temptation to attack it would be probably to attack the sentencing and to, well, look, here's the line, right? It's only a tree. So that is going to be the starting point, the roots, if you like, of the conversation that we're about to have. But then we'll branch out. So it's only a tree. Therefore, 4 years and 3 months for chopping it down is objectively ridiculous. Right? Are you with me so far? That's if you like, I'm not going to move through my gears. I'm going to stay in first or second gear on my thinking. It's only a tree. Therefore, 4 years and 3 months for chopping it down is ridiculous. But what happens when you push up into third gear or fourth gear and you start thinking about it a little bit more deeply? It's not only a tree. Do you want me to introduce you to a wonderful word? God, that's patronising. You probably know it already, but I had to look it up. I had to double check what it actually meant. I thought I knew what it meant, and I did, but not quite. It's a wonderful word. It may even become your new favourite word by 11:15 today. The word is quiddity. 2 Ds, Q-U-I-D-D-I-T-Y. And it means the essence of something, or indeed someone. A person has quiddity, the very essence of something. If you start thinking in terms of quiddity, then it's not just a tree. It's a receptacle that holds millions of feelings. So you chop down a tree that nobody knows about, even if it's one of the most magnificent trees in the world, you are doing something very different from when you chop down a tree that millions of people care about. The quiddity, or the quiddity if you prefer, the quiddity of that tree, the very essence of that tree, is intrinsically and inextricably linked to how we feel about it, how you feel about it, the quiddity of the tree. So, automatically, I would argue, and this might be another pendulum hour, because at 9 o'clock this morning, I was fairly persuaded that it was a stupid sentence, 4 years and 3 months, until 2 colleagues actually started explaining to me why they feel that the sentence was correct, and they pushed my gear stick. I moved into 3rd, possibly even 4th gear. You're going to ring me and take me to 5th, 03456060973, or indeed reverse. I think we'll end with the motoring analogies now, but that is not my. It's a gear stick hour, not a pendulum hour. Are we going to work our way through the gears, or are we going to move into reverse? Because it's not just a tree. It's about what society says to men who treat the feelings of their fellow citizens with such obvious and ignorant contempt. And it doesn't matter whether they knew what they were doing or not. It's contempt for your fellow human. It's contempt for your fellow citizen. It's contempt for the public, this act. What's your biggest bugbear? Don't ring me, don't ring me, don't ring me. But what's your biggest bugbear about how other people behave in a way that demonstrates their abject lack of concern for your feelings? It might be something little. People who are really, really loud, having conversations on their speakers, on phones, on public transport. People watching films without wearing headphones or listening to music on public transport. I'm not trying to steal Sheila Fogarty's lunch, but it winds everybody up, right? We've tried to get into the psychology of it. We've tried to get into the reasons why it offends our sensibilities so much and whether it should do or not. But what it speaks to is a sense that people are behaving with contempt for, well, you fill in the gaps. For you, for me, for us, or for the norms, for the ties that bind, for the things that make a society civilized. You think about others. So you chop down a tree that is iconic. It's not just the material value that should be taken into account, although somehow they've estimated that the whole thing cost about £640,000. It's not just people talking, yeah, I told you not to call me. Well, you're not, actually. You're just texting me. But that yeah, I know, your bugbears. And they seem little. Looking at phones in the cinema drives me mad. People talking, discarding litter makes me consider the death penalty. So all of the things, so you toss some litter out of it, all of the things, low-level things you see people doing that essentially announce to the world, I don't care about anyone else. We're probably all a little bit guilty of it in ways. And when we do it, we probably don't realise that we're doing it. But we've all got the things that we think of, right? I don't care. No, I won't be quiet. No, I won't take my rubbish home with me. No, I won't turn down the volume on my phone. No, I won't buy some earpods. No, I won't conduct a phone call at a civilised volume compared to... no, I won't move. I won't do this. I won't do that. I won't put my airline seat back up so that you can actually move your knees. They're people who just don't care. And then you move it up a notch. You turn the volume. And you come to a tree that means a lot, an awful lot, to an awful lot of people. Planted in the 1800s. And truly, in undeniably exotic. The bloke who planted it even bought some land around Hadrian's Wall to preserve it. It's nestled in a dip in the Roman structure. That's 2,000 years right there. The tree, almost, don't at me. Visitors from all around the world. It appeared in a film. Admittedly, it was relocated geographically in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, but it's an iconic image. It's a beautiful image. And I struggled in some ways with the anger that was prompted when it was reported that it had been chopped down. And in a way, I still struggle now, because I'm not part of the quiddity. I didn't realise this was going to go on so long either, but it turns out I've got a hell of a lot to say about this tree, probably because of the quiddity of it. So, what is the essence of the tree? Why is this sentence correct? I want you to try. I don't want to have a debate about this. I will do if you ring me to tell me why the sentence is wrong. But can you help me and others understand why it's actually correct? Because I want to get out of second gear. I want to get into the quiddity of it. I want to get into the social relevance, the power, the importance of teaching people that they can't go through their life treating everybody else's feelings with contempt. Or have I got it completely wrong? Wouldn't be the first time. I'm currently in third gear. It's a correct sentence. I was in first gear this morning. It was a wrong sentence. 0345 6060 973. It's just a tree. It's not though, is it? If it's not just a tree, here's the question for you. I got there in the end. Calm down, Keith. This is why I overshoot my junction sometimes. If it's not just a tree, what is it? 0345 6060 973. Because if it is just a tree, the sentence is ridiculous. If it's not just a tree, what is it? Hit the numbers now, you will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11. A few of you have reminded me of a film I've actually seen 28 years later, which is fantastic. I mean, if you like that kind of thing, it is. Even if you don't, I think it's probably worth seeing. It's an absolute masterpiece. And the tree is in it because it's a dystopia. It's an alternative future that Danny Boyle and his collaborators depict. And it's a future in which the tree has not been chopped down. Largely because a virus has swept the population and turned almost all of us into zombies, so there was no one really in the business of wanting to chop down a tree for clicks and giggles. But I just thought I'd mention that. You see, the digitally created tree, because that is part of the answer to the question. Why would a film director... Oh, and Irving Welsh is coming on Full Disclosure soon. I've already recorded it. I don't know when that episode is dropping. But I mention that because, of course, Danny Boyle directed Trainspotting. But, you know, something that speaks to it being more than a tree. That's the question. I should shut up now. I've got there. I've finally got the perfect question for this topic. If it's not just a tree, what is it? Chris is in Lymm in Cheshire. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hello, morning.
Hello, Chris.
I was just saying to your researcher just now that really it wasn't a mindless act, and they knew what they were doing. They drove all that way from Carlisle to do it.
Yes.
So in terms of quiddity, James,
yeah.
quiddity, which I've never heard.
Ding, ding, ding,
I've never
ding.
heard that word before.
It's a great word, though, right? It's a great word.
Yes, yeah. They in terms of that, if there was a scale of quiddity, I suppose it was quite high because they knew what they were doing. They drove all that way to do it. They could have
chopped down any tree, couldn't they?
They could have chopped down a tree around the corner if they said they were drunk. They could have just nipped round the corner, chopped a tree down, but they drove all that way on purpose to cut that one down to hurt people.
That's such a good point.
Feelings.
So it becomes so if we're answering the question if it's not just a tree, what is it? It's a weapon that was deliberately deployed to hurt other people.
Yeah, I think so, James.
I do too.
To be honest with you.
Because if you want to chop a tree down, go and chop a tree down. There's lots of trees you can chop down for fun if you get a kick out of chopping down trees, but it wasn't the chopping down the tree they were getting the kick out of. It was something very different. It was the reaction that they hoped to get. Now, they might not have known that it was going to spawn widespread outrage, but they must have known it was going to upset people, otherwise they wouldn't have chosen that tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, really. And I think the sentence was bang on, to be honest.
Well, I think I'm going to struggle by 12 o'clock today to disagree with you, although I'm not fully there yet. 4 years and 3 months is a lot. And neither is it pertinent, just for the record, to start talking about how lenient other sentences are, because sentencing in this country is off the charts at the moment, the highest that it's ever been, and much higher than countries that have much better records of I'll do the joke, shall I? Again, treehabilitation. Budum tish. I'm here all week. Try the veal. Chris, thank you. Oh, Chris, hang on. Eleanor says I have to ask what your surname is. You don't have to tell me because it's, data protection and all that.
It's Oakes, O-A-K-E-S. So, yeah, not made up, promise.
So, no, you're only allowed to ring in if your name has an arboreal connection. Thank you, Chris. So, if it's not just a tree, what is it? Answer, first one from Chris, it's a weapon. It's a weapon carefully and deliberately selected because of the knowledge of how much it would hurt people. I'm going to chop down that tree. Let's go out and chop a tree, lads. No, let's go and chop down that tree. Why? Because it means so much to people. So immediately you move away from saying, oh, it's just a tree. Because if it was just a tree, it wouldn't matter which tree they chose to chop. But they chose this tree. The quiddity. The quiddy-tree. Tom is in Harrow Weald. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hello. Really, it's just in answer to your question, if it's not just a tree, what is it?
Yeah.
And I'm old enough to remember when what mattered was, it's not yours.
Yeah. Well, I think that still matters. They're going to prison for 4 years and 3 months.
Well, yes, but it seems to be, the increase in theft and vandalism and all sorts now, also, I think, seems to be related to the fact that we're losing grip on this. It's not your property.
Well, there's still crimes. There's only a finite amount of punishments you can issue. And I suspect some people would think that theft was a more serious crime than chopping down a tree. I mean, in some ways, it was all of ours, that tree. It was public property, wasn't it? Not private property. Oh, I think he's gone. 11:26 is the time. Lee's in Plymouth. Lee, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello, Lee.
I'm calling from Plymouth, and a couple of years ago, we had some city centre trees felled because
I'm just going to try and improve your phone line, if I may. I'm only picking up about 1 word in 4 at the moment, so that must be even more frustrating for people who aren't wearing whopping great earphones in a state-of-the-art studio at the moment. 26 minutes after 11 is the time. Quite a few of you picking up on Chris's point. David writes, if it was just a tree, then why drive 40 miles to cut it down? Cut down the one at the end of the road. It was cut down to cause suffering. That's another word we haven't used yet. It was cut down to cause suffering. It was. It was cut down to cause suffering, and that is what the sentence reflects. I'm writing all these words down because, I mean, hand on heart, at 9 o'clock this morning, I said to Eleanor, I think it's bloody ridiculous, 4 years and 3 months for chopping down a tree. And she said, I don't. And so I said, well, I think the first thing I said was, don't be ridiculous. But after that, I said, why? And she started explaining. And you start thinking to yourself, it's not just a tree. What is it if it's not just a tree? Answer, it's something that has been deployed to cause suffering to others, to cause mental anguish to others. Now, you can say so what to that, but it's a different proposition, isn't it, from focusing entirely upon the wood, as it were. What is the quiddity, the essence of the tree that makes it different from other trees? Answer, the emotions invested in it by fellow human beings. Lee's in Plymouth. Sorry, Lee, let's try again.
Yes.
That's better.
Is that better?
Yes.
A couple of years ago in Plymouth, in the darkness of the middle of night, the council chopped down the city centre trees because they're making way for new trees. The outpouring of grief amongst the city people, the men and the women, was bizarre.
Why was it bizarre?
I think if you spoke to each and every person, they would struggle to explain where that emotion was really coming from.
Well, that's the point about emotions, isn't it? Is that we always struggle to explain them, otherwise they'd just be ideas.
It was absolutely bizarre. It's something very spiritual. It's an unseen thing. But it was the way it was done, and they did it in the middle of the night because they knew.
Well, to avoid the protest, and also because there's less traffic. If I'm not being glib, but if you're chopping down trees, you kind of have to do it in the middle of the night. Otherwise, there'll be much more traffic that has to be rediverted or stopped. And that wasn't done to cause suffering. So, I mean, I understand your point about the human relationship with a tree being relevant to this, but the council didn't chop those trees down to deliberately cause suffering to the people, the good people of Plymouth.
They did it deliberately. No, they didn't. But these two young guys, one of them apparently is a carer. One of them has diagnosed depression. There were so many other ways they could have been humiliated and ashamed and brought to justice. I do think their sentence is not suitable for this particular pair of idiots.
Very delicately put. Okay. I mean, there was only so much at the judge's disposal. I suppose a community service order perhaps could be tweaked to involve trees, but I think, didn't one of them work with trees anyway, or did they both work with trees anyway? They don't seem to have a particularly spiritual connection with them. But yeah, all right, I hear what you're saying. I think I disagree. I think that the suffering that it has caused is the grounds for the sentencing. Context is everything. I don't know if anyone's tried to bring that flipping woman into this conversation, the one who is in jail for essentially trying to incite pogroms in the United Kingdom in 2024. But the context is everything. So if you were to post something saying set fire to hotels when there was nobody out there setting fire to hotels, then your punishment would be considerably less than when you go and set fire to some hotels and there is a rampaging mob of people on the streets of your country setting fire to hotels. That should be obvious that that's the case. I went on a crash course on context-related sentencing during the 2012 riots, which oddly nobody ever claimed were examples of two-tier justice, because most of the people being locked up for things that they probably wouldn't have been locked up for outside of the context of an urban riot were young and often of colour. So the kind of people claiming that inciting pogroms is absolutely fine didn't seem to care about them back when Boris Johnson was mayor and we had riots in this city. But context-related, and the context here isn't the broader happenings in the country. The context here is the very specific nature of this tree, or, if you prefer, the quiddity of it. 11:31 is the time. Dominic Ellis has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The point that has been missed, writes Nigel, is that the law should be disinterested and shouldn't pass sentence to appease public feeling. The law should be free to apply the law without taking public, political or media pressure into consideration. I don't think that point has been missed, Nigel, but if indeed it had, then you have returned our attention to it. And Adrian takes up a similar point when he writes, reasons for imprisonment. Number 1, protection of society. Number 2, deterrent. Number 3, satisfying the people's need for punishment and or justice. And number 4, rehabilitation. Which I think you missed a trick there. You could have written rehabilitation. So 4+ years of imprisonment serves only the third point, as in satisfying the public need, which is Nigel's concern, that shouldn't even be taken into account at all. The cost of imprisonment just to placate the baying masses seems ludicrous to me. And I would agree with that if, and I may well end up concluding that you're right, and it is being done simply to placate the baying masses, but I think it's deterrent. I really do. I think it is saying, if you're thinking of going out to deliberately destroy something that is loved and cherished, then you will be treated differently from someone who goes out and destroys something that is not loved and cherished. Hey, you'll get your collar felt for burning down a bus shelter, won't you? Criminal damage. But you're not probably going to get 4 years and 3 months in prison. So the thing that you have destroyed has to be pertinent in material terms, and they estimate, I'm not sure how, using something called CAVAT, C-A-V-A-T, they estimate its value to be about £620,000. The court heard, the prosecution put the value at about £458,000. I don't understand that at all. But the important thing is that it was more than £5,000, which is the threshold for putting it into the higher category of harm. So the detective inspector on the case actually said, if you consider the impact of the action as opposed to purely looking at a value of a tree because you can't replace it, then you've got to take into consideration what the impact of the act has been. So he would disagree with you, Nigel, and he's a detective inspector. I think you do have to take into account what the impact has been. And I think you also, to disagree with Adrian, have to recognise the deterrent factor in the sentencing as well, because the message is, if you set out to deliberately destroy something that other people love and value for no reason other than your own sick appetites, you can expect to go to jail. But I say again, at 9 o'clock this morning, I thought that the sentence looked, I thought it looked very silly, very silly. I don't anymore. Daniel's in Ipswich. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah, I'm just thinking they probably did it for a little bit of notoriety to get in the papers to make themselves look good.
I don't think they wanted. I mean, it emerges in the recorded exchanges between the two of them that they didn't want it to be known that it was them. One of them dobbed the other one in after they fell out, and then the whole house of cards came tumbling down. But they certainly didn't want to sort of tag it. They were not doing it for notoriety. They were doing it to amuse them.
They filmed it though, didn't they?
To amuse themselves and each other, yes, but they didn't film themselves. They weren't easily identified. In fact, they weren't identifiable at all from the footage. It was only when one of them dobbed the other one in that the police got on the trail. The footage wasn't enough for them to do that, which kind of proves that they weren't doing it for notoriety or infamy. Infamy.
Just thinking about the sentence as well. I mean, there's been a few people that's been injured and had their lives sort of hurt through assault and all these other kinds of things, and some of them don't get jail for nearly as long as 4 years.
Sentencing is pretty high in this country, pretty severe for all crimes, actually. It may not feel like it, but if you simply look at the historical arc of sentencing, if I wasn't in such a wonderful mood now, I'd demand examples from you, Daniel, but we both know you haven't got any.
Well, there was one example of one guy that I can't remember exactly who it was, but
exactly.
I think it was Ipswich. In fact, I think it was an ex-soldier like I am, and I think he got assaulted and he was drunk. He's got permanent brain damage, and I think that does sort of last longer than a tree, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but we don't know what the sentence of the person that did it was, and also we don't know what the judge was taking into account in that case, and also, I mean, it's not relevant to what the judge has done in this case. He's looked at one crime and handed down one sentence. You look at a completely different crime and a completely different sentence, and try to sort of make sense out of comparing the two. You are on a hiding to nothing, although you could probably get a job on a tabloid newspaper, so I don't want to sound too rude. 11:39 is the time. This notion of quiddity, though, is at the heart of what Daniel is saying. You're going to struggle to say that damaging a tree is more serious than damaging a human, right? And I wouldn't try to make that argument personally, but it's more than just a tree. It's not enough more than just a tree to become comparable to a human, but it's a receptacle. That's the thing I find so interesting. It's almost philosophical, isn't it? This notion of why causing unnecessary offence is absolutely intrinsic to this case, and the unnecessary offence caused would be as nothing if the tree had been somewhere else. 20 to 12 is the time. Ian is in Broxbourne. Ian, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
There was one thing you said at sort of the top of this conversation that really struck me, a particular word that I thought had such resonance, which was the word contempt.
Not quiddity.
Quiddity was great.
Yeah.
I'm marking that up in the diary.
Yeah, thanks, man.
But I thought contempt.
Yes.
And the other thing you said, contempt for the feelings of others. And contempt for how others feel and how the community feels. And, from taking down a tree, that means a lot to people. You even mentioned things like, the person on the train with their music being played loudly, or the film blaring out. And it's interesting, I seem to remember, I go into London a few times a week for work. I seem to remember, say, 2019, you might have one or two people, with a bit of noise on the phone. But I seem to have found over the last 5 years, post sort of COVID, and I think particularly the events of 2021, 2022, people do seem to care less. And they do seem to possibly have a bit more contempt.
We've talked about this. Some people wonder whether we lost some of our social skills during lockdown, whether or not the kind of normalisation of unpleasantness has contributed on an individual as well as a sort of national and institutional level. But that is there. I mean, technically, the 1967 Forestry Act allows judges to punish people who illegally fell trees with jail and uncapped fines. So there's nothing unique about the legislation that's been deployed, but there is something unique about the
Something
contempt?
shifted.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, the thing is, my feeling, I said this to the person I was chatting to on the phone when I rang in, is that I'm so sorry to dig up the ghost of Boris Johnson, but the contempt with which they threw their parties and they looked after their mates. I remember the betrayal I felt at the time of like, you just have utter contempt for us.
Yeah.
And I think that I have no empirical evidence for this, but I'm just wondering if that sinks in. You know,
can we get a round of applause for Ian? He's blaming it on Boris Johnson. I should dedicate my next book to you, Ian. That's precisely the sort of contribution that we value most on this programme. But there is a serious point beneath my mockery, and that serious point is a message was sent to the public that the people in charge can do whatever the hell they want and stuff the consequences.
They have contempt for us.
So why can't I chop down a tree?
Yeah.
I got people crawling through the corridors of Downing Street, puking their guts up and getting off with each other when I'm not allowed to go to my nan's funeral. So why the hell should I obey any rules? Why should I abide by any respect?
Absolutely. And I'll be the first to admit I felt those feelings. Now, I didn't act on them. I still want to be a good member of the community, but I think that message got through, you know. I think it really did. And I'm not saying there's a direct link here, but
of course not.
But it does. It pivots things. You know, it doesn't matter if it's only 10% or 15%, but it gets the message was clear, I think.
Background music changes and people respond accordingly. And if the background music is contempt for each other, let alone contempt for the rules, disregard, I'm going to drive to Barnard Castle and back and laugh in your face. And why would society not shift on its axis ever so slightly towards that word that Ian picked up on, contempt for each other, contempt for the fellow members of the public, contempt for society? 11:43 is the time. Dee's in Reading. Dee, what would you like to say?
Good morning. So I've really thought about this,
and
I think it's a crime.
Go on, Dee.
Right. I think it's a crime against the nation.
Yes.
I really do. I mean, they've taken away something that is a part of our natural history. It's a crime against the environment and the heritage site. And I just feel really sad about it.
I do too. Well, I mean, I'm not as sad as I would about some other trees that I have a personal connection to. But I understand people who have a personal connection to this one. Do you know, you just made me think a bit as well. It's contagious. Do you remember, what's that old proverb about, the riddle about if a tree falls down in a forest and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Yeah.
So if this had no media coverage whatsoever, you couldn't have done that, though, would it?
It would have.
Yeah, you could. I mean,
it would have.
No, you hang on. You could have got a super injunction. There you go. I bet no one thought I'd be able to knit together the first hour and the second hour of this programme. But there you go. Ye of little faith. You could have got a super injunction to ban all reporting of the tree on pain of imprisonment. And then what would the sentence have been?
You know, I just think that, you know, what I find really interesting is where are all the monument screamers? You know, as soon as a little a monument is questioned, they're all out. But this is part of our natural history, a part of our natural heritage.
Well, no one's approving of it. No one's coming out and saying that they've they're glad it was chopped down. So I know what you mean about the statues and the monuments and the people who sometimes appear to fetishise them. A tree should perhaps be of more value. The quiddity of a statue is about much more than stone. That's a brilliant point, actually, Dee. This word quiddity that I'm temporarily obsessed with. No, you would never say they chuck a statue in a statue of a slaver. William Colston, was it, gets chucked into the sea in Bristol, and people are up in arms about it. Edward Colston, and you're sort of, why are people up in arms about it? Answer, well, because they don't think we should be condemning slavery, because they're weird and almost certainly racist. Other people are up in arms about the existence of the statue in the first place, or the fact that it's still on public display in Bristol. Why? It's just a stone. Except it's not, is it? The quiddity of that statue is more than just the stone, or the marble, or whatever it's made of. The quiddity of it defines the punishment for destroying it. And in the case of the tree, we haven't identified the quiddity, but we know it's more than just a tree. Thank you, Dee. It's 11:46.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 10 to 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I like this. It's a really neat distillation of the discussion. 2 replies to my blue sky. 4 years doesn't seem excessive to me for the criminal damage of the historic and beloved tree, as well as the wall beside it, which made up a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Peter responds, it really is excessive. It means that if society is really disturbed about a certain criminal act, you get a much higher sentence. Punishment should be related to the deed, felling a tree, and with some restraint, the disturbance in society. But here, the disturbance alone defines the punishment. Not true, Peter, if you're listening, or just tinkering around on socials. Not true. There's some dispute over which system you use to assess the value of the damage, the cost of the damage. The police originally went with £620,000. The court prosecution heard it was 458. I don't know whether one includes the damage to Hadrian's Wall and one doesn't, but either way, it's around £500,000 worth of damage. Put that into the algorithm and it comes out with rather more to be concerned about than mere public feeling or mere disturbance. And yet, I don't know, how do you persuade someone, we haven't done it yet, but how do you persuade someone who thinks it's just a tree that in the same way that a plaque commemorating something or someone is not just a piece of metal, or a statue is not just a lump of rock, a tree, some trees are not just trees. This tree was not just a tree. How do you persuade them? How do you convince them? Can you? Because if you can't, hard to justify the sentence. 11:51 is the time. Kerry is in Maidstone. Kerry, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Hello,
yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about this.
It's only me.
But I feel... only you. But I do feel passionately about it.
Go on.
Well, I know that the word suffering has been used, and I totally agree with that. And I'd say the particular suffering that we're talking about here is a deep grief.
Really?
Yeah, I think there's been an outpouring of grief for this tree. And I think we all know what it's like to walk in nature and we kind of feel connected with nature around us. It's hard to put into words, but there is a relationship there.
Yes, there is.
And we can feel held, we can feel contained, we can feel uplifted. There is a relationship there, and this goes back to our biology, because we are part of an ecosystem, and that ecosystem of connectedness precurses any law that we would have ever thought of. So I'm just wondering whether that judge who gave 4 years is either aware or not aware, subconsciously, but certainly aware of the empathy, through empathy for lots of other people and their outpouring grief, that this is a big deal. This is a
and that does have
a deep injustice.
Yes, and it does have an air of deterrent to it as well, because any other idiot thinking of going out to chop down an iconic tree is going to think twice now, hopefully, just as anybody. Well, I tell you what, Mark makes an excellent point. I like this. If I pick up my local paper and it states that 2 ewes have knocked down Mr. Jones's precious roses, I'd roll my eyes and probably think slow news day. But if I read that they'd behaved in the same way towards roses in a cemetery, I'd be furious. So it has a different... So if they'd gone into a field full of sycamores, I mean, we wouldn't shake them by the hand and say, well done if they chop one down for fun, but it would feel very different from how this feels.
Mm. And in nature, the relationship we have is called reciprocity. It's that relationship, it's that to and fro between us. And that has been deeply damaged when this tree was cut down.
Okay, I'm going to spring something on you that you weren't expecting, because I ignored it. I ignored it at the time, but you've... I'm not going to be able to find it now. You've made me think perhaps I shouldn't have ignored it. Let me see if I can just find it. Give me one second.
Okay.
I'm trying to just talk among yourselves. I'm trying to find the relevant message that came in, because I think it's quite a funny one in the context of what you just said. Yeah, here it is from Gareth. Right. I really can't get on with this argument of the hurt that they are causing to so many people. It's estimated that there are 3.4 million vegans in the UK now. Every animal that is slaughtered hurts those people's feelings. It can't just be an argument when it's only put on certain cases. Gareth in Manchester. How do you respond to that? Because if we're going to start saying we need to punish these men because of how we feel about the tree they chopped down, then who's going to think of the vegans every time we have a beef burger?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean,
I don't know. It might be just a really silly message, which was my original thought until you started talking.
Well, I guess there's a big debate to be had about veganism and whether, as humans, we were there to eat meat and whether that's a natural thing for us to be doing or not, as the case may be. But this tree doesn't enter that debate.
Very nicely put. Very nicely put, actually. Yeah, they are. In a way, you're comparing apples and pears to keep the tree theme going. Thank you, Kerry. And of course, it is possible we'll look back and consider the consumption of meat to be heinous, to be hideous. It's a thesis that's explored brilliantly in that film that the inimitable Simon Amstell made that I used to talk about all the time when we were discussing matters vegetarian or vegan. Thank you, Kerry. 11:55 is the time. PMQs on the horizon. That'll be live from shortly after 12. Aggie Chambre joining me shortly to tee that up. But there's time for Jacqueline in... Is it Methil?
Yes.
In Fife, the Kingdom of
Yes.
Fife. What would you like to say,
Kingdom.
Jacqueline?
If it's not a tree, is it a protest against sort of, I've kind of lost my train of thought.
That's all right. Shall I wait? I mean, you might twig it in a minute.
Yeah. Well, for example,
This isn't going to be What About a Tree, is it, Jacqueline?
No.
Okay, carry on.
For example, Boris Johnson and lots of other people, when they broke the COVID rules, they got fined.
They did.
Now, I understand that a lot of people feel upset about this tree, but are we perhaps seeing the tree and not the woods?
Oh. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, in other words...
What's in the woods?
About all the people suffering in Britain because of government cutbacks?
I knew it. You are doing What About a Tree.
Oh.
You're saying what about...
I didn't think of it that way.
Well, it is, though, because you can... Two things at the same time. We can be deeply concerned about human suffering and also want to lock up two morons who chopped down the sycamore tree in the Sycamore Gap.
I think it's too much, and I have to say everything that's going on or been said in the last hour has not convinced me otherwise.
Oh, what about liquidity?
Yes, that's a word that I didn't know until you.
It's a great word.
Yeah.
Well, at least you got that out the last hour. And what about the idea of the hurt and suffering that these men deliberately set out to cause? If the crime is not...
Did they?
Yes. Why, they drove 40 miles, Jacqueline.
Well...
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there would be at least several trees between where they set out from and where they ended up that they could have chopped down with rather less fanfare and controversy and suffering and pain and hurt and upset and heartbreak.
But perhaps all of that was nowhere in their minds, but this is a tree that everyone seems to care more about than the people.
What about a tree? That's more What About a Tree. I do not allow What About a Tree on this programme, and I certainly don't allow What About a Tree, because it's not relevant. You can't say that. No one who cares about the tree...
You can't say that it's not relevant.
You can't. I can. I just did. Nobody who cares about the tree is automatically cast by you as someone who doesn't care about the people. That's not fair.
But it's not fair to say that those two idiots,
morons.
And let's face it, they are idiots.
Yes, that's true.
But there isn't really anything to say that they deliberately set out to cause suffering.
I think there is.
I don't.
We'll have to agree to disagree. You take care, Jacqueline. Thank you.
You too.
It's not like they committed treason. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Time to branch out and move on to PMQs. Shall I take a bow now? No. Have you twigged what's going on here? I've waited an hour to do this, and they're all coming flooding out now. It's like some sort of... Aggie Chambre is here because PMQs is about to begin. What do you think's going to happen, Aggie?
It's a good question today because there's obviously one story really in town and one story that should be talked about in the House of Commons as much as possible. One question, 6 questions Kemi Badenoch should ask, and 6 questions Sir Keir Starmer should answer. That, of course, is the catastrophic data leak and the seeming cover-up that followed it, that was revealed by our colleague Lewis Goodall yesterday on your programme at midday. I don't think Kemi Badenoch will ask even one question about that.
Well, she has often tried to make hay about things that were her colleagues' fault and pin them on Keir Starmer, but I think even her powers of delusion would probably struggle to pin this one on the Labour government.
I think that would be difficult. I was speaking to one
I wouldn't rule it out, though, and I'm not even being facetious when I say that.
No, and also, you know, as I say, I think that's what should be asked about. I think that's what should be talked about. So were she to ask 1 or 2 or even 6 questions about it, I think that would be a good thing. But I spoke to one Conservative this morning about what they thought would come up and asked whether they thought that would come up. And they said, no, it's a terrible look for us.
Yes.
And a blue-on-blue row is another terrible look for the party. And they're referencing there the fact that you've had an op-ed from Johnny Mercer, the former Conservative Veterans Minister, who's branded the handling of the data leak the most hapless display of incompetence by successive ministers and officials that I saw in my time in government.
Yeah, he's not bitter.
No, he's fine. He's having a nice time out of politics. And then you've got Ben Wallace basically saying it was not, as some are childishly trying to claim, a cover-up. So I think we can rule out, I say this.
But she might call for a root and branch review of the whole thing. Thank you, Mark. I'm not taking the credit for that one. So if not that, then what?
I think the economy. So that is somewhere that the Conservatives feel they have a bit of room to push the government. Obviously, we had the Mansion House speech by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, last night, and last week. Kemi Badenoch, I thought, had actually quite a successful Prime Minister's questions, asking lots of questions about tax. And so I think that is probably the most likely, and obviously comes on a day where inflation is pushed up to 3.6%, well above the target of 2%.
Unexpectedly as well, and a little contraction in the economy that wasn't foreseen. I wouldn't be stunned if that gets reviewed later, which is often the case because the margins are so low, but inflation won't be, I don't think. Is there another headline in terms of refuses to rule out, or has she used all them up now? I mean, she got a headline last week. If she asks the same question this week and he refuses to rule it out again, it doesn't get another round of headlines, does it, really? Even in completely ridiculous newspaper industry.
I wouldn't rule it out, honestly.
Really? You think that's still wrong?
I don't think she will go with the same strategy. I thought it was genuinely quite a good strategy last week. I don't think she'll go with the same strategy where she asks one question and then tries to show the difference between those questions. But I suspect, inflation, what Rachel Reeves said last night on slashing regulation and lack of growth could be something. But also Ed Davey, of course, also has a question. So potentially he could ask a question about 2 questions, actually, about Afghanistan. But also I've been told he's likely to ask a question about Palestine and maybe asking the government to go significantly further than it has said it would do in order to stop, quoting the person here, stop the horrors going on in Gaza. So that...
Yeah, well, someone has to. It does seem to draw rather less attention than the outpourings of a pop star on stage at Glastonbury. More children dead overnight, and again, people queuing for aid and queuing for help, being victims of IDF activity, IDF action. So good luck to Ed Davey if he does decide to go down that road. We'll have to wait and see. It's that part of the week where we sit watching a screen or waiting for Eleanor to say in my ear that it's time to cross, or Keith, to cross live to the House of Commons, where PMQs is just to begin. And guess what? He just did.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the head of the OBR warned the government that higher and higher levels of taxes are bad for growth. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you what's bad for growth. 14 years of a Tory government. That's what the stagnant growth for 14 years, leaving a £22 billion black hole. What we've achieved, Mr. Speaker, in the first quarter of this year is the highest growth in the G7, something we promised before the election. Investment of £120 billion into this country, which is a record in the first year of any government, and 3 trade deals, all of which will boost growth.
Mr. Speaker, he's talking about what he achieved. We just heard that inflation is up again, the worst in the G7. We left him with 2% inflation. We have have borrowing up, unemployment up, taxes are up under his government. The fact is the Prime Minister doesn't get it, so let me tell him. His budget last year had high taxes. That's why the economy is contracting. But, Mr. Speaker, the government has said that they won't put up taxes for people on modest incomes. But they also seem incapable of explaining who is in that category. So can the Prime Minister clear up the confusion and tell us what he thinks a modest income is?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I think of the working people across this country who put in every day and don't get back what they deserve, and that's who we're working for. That's who we're fixing the country. The sort of people that work hard but haven't necessarily got the savings to buy themselves out of problems. And, Mr. Speaker, that's who we're working for, and that's why we put the national living wage up. That's an extra £1,400. The national minimum wage up. That's £2,500 a year. The triple lock, Mr. Speaker, that went up pension up £470. And, of course, we're extending childcare, opening free breakfast clubs and free school meals. We know exactly who we're working for. She comes here every week and just talks the country down.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not talking the country down. I'm talking him down. I asked him what a modest income was. He answered what a working person is. He doesn't know what a modest income is, and even on working people, they cannot define it. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury said that working people are people who don't get a payslip. But millions of self-employed people don't get a payslip. So are the self-employed next in line for a labour tax rate?
The self-employed were the very people who suffered under their watch, repeatedly suffered under their watch, particularly, if I remember, during COVID, and when they didn't get the support that they needed. But she talks the country down, she cherry-picks. We have created, Mr. Speaker, since we've been in government, we've created 380,000 jobs, the employment rate is up, and inactivity is down, the complete opposite of what we inherited.
I don't know where these 3,000 jobs are coming from. Unemployment has gone up every month under his government. And perhaps he should speak to farmers and small business people and find out what those working people think about his government. But, Mr. Speaker, that's not all. We know the Chancellor is launching a review into pension contributions. It's as clear as day why this is. It is because the government is considering taxing them. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that a tax on pension contributions is a tax on working people?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we made absolutely clear manifesto commitments, which she asked me about last week and we're keeping to. I'm not going to write the budget months out from the budget. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the decisions that we took to invest in our NHS, to invest in our public services, all the decisions that they opposed. And it's no wonder that after a first year of a Labour government, business confidence is a 9-year high. That's longer than she's been in government. Mr. Speaker, 384, I'm not withdrawing, I'm going to repeat. Business confidence is at a 9-year high.
Mr. Speaker, he says he's not going to write the budget, but his Chancellor is on the front of the Daily Mirror talking about what she's going to do on taxes. So why can't he do the same in the Chamber? Yes. But I asked him about pension contributions. The truth is he doesn't want to talk about pension contributions. It's all right for the Prime Minister. He has his own special law to stop his personal pension from being taxed. But let's be honest, Mr. Speaker, this is really about choices. My party knows that there is an alternative to tax rises. It's cutting spending, something that they are too scared or perhaps too weak to do. We offered to work with him to reform welfare and make meaningful savings. But his refusal sent a signal, and now the cost of borrowing is rising. The budget is in November, that is months away, and the markets may not wait. What will the Prime Minister be doing over the summer to get a grip on the cost of borrowing?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, they left the most incredible mess in the economy. And now they think that they can lecture others. I think just last week, their chairman said that they've done the necessary apologising for the 14 years of failure. They've done the necessary. I didn't hear an apology for the lowest living standards in living history. I didn't hear an apology for the £22 billion black hole. I didn't hear an apology for the Liz Truss mini budget. So maybe she should like to stand up and make that apology now.
Mr. Speaker, he's not doing... Yes. Mr. Speaker, he's not planning on doing anything this summer to fix the economy. The shadow of the last budget is hanging over the entire country. Just yesterday, only the Conservatives supported the two-child benefit cap because only the Conservatives believe in living within our means. Not Labour, not the Liberal Democrats, not Reform. But it's the end of term, Mr. Speaker, so why don't we go through his end of term scorecard? The economy is contracting. Inflation, highest in the G7. Unemployment, up every month under this government. Spending, out of control. Borrowing costs, more expensive than Greece. And this is just the first year, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party should be ashamed of what it is doing to the country. Mr. Speaker, they can shake their heads as much as they like. The fact is, this summer, they're going to have to go to their constituents and explain why they've been making such a mess over the last 12 months. And isn't the case, Mr. Speaker, that the worst, given that this is just their first year, the worst is yet to come?
We're happily going to go to our constituents. We're going to tell them we promised 2 million extra NHS appointments and we delivered 4 million extra appointments. Mr. Speaker, I've got to upgrade that. It's now 4.5 million extra appointments. So we're going to tell our constituents that. Then we're going to tell them about the free school meals we're rolling about, the free breakfast clubs, the free childcare and school uniform costs. We'll tell them about that. And then when we've done that, we'll move on to affordable houses and tell them about the £39 billion we're investing. When we finish that, we'll tell them about the rail and road upgrades across the country, the £120 billion investment, and of course the 3 trade deals. And Mr. Speaker, we're only just getting started.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will never know exactly how much it meant to victims of the Troubles in Northern Ireland from right across society when he came, looked them in their eyes and promised them that no murderer would be immune from prosecution. Can he tell us when the last time he spoke to the Taoiseach about the shared approach to this issue was, and can he recommit today to those victims to ensure that no murderer will be seen as above the law?
Well, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this is a really important issue. Can I begin by saying I have a profound respect and debt to our veterans who served. This is a complicated issue, and we've got to get this right. Veterans are at risk because of the false promises of the last government. Exactly. Let's be clear. They made a false promise of immunity that does not exist. It was unlawful, it was struck down, and it was undeliverable. Their failed Legacy Act leaves veterans exposed with no settled process. We will create a secure, transparent system that protects veterans from unjustified persecution and gives victims, families and survivors the confidence that they need in the process.
Sir Ed David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's words about the shocking Afghan data breach under the previous government kept secret for 3 years? And he will have our support if he decides to pursue a public inquiry. Mr. Speaker, I know the Prime Minister will agree that the shocking rise of anti-Semitism we have seen since Hamas's October the 7th terror attacks has no place in our society. British Jews should not have to live in fear of hatred, racism and abuse on our streets or online. A new report from the Board of Deputies Commission on Anti-Semitism, chaired by Lord Mann and Dame Penny Mordaunt, has set out 10 recommendations to tackle this appalling scourge. Will the Prime Minister study this report, and will his government respond to it in full?
Prime Minister.
Yes, we will. And we must fight anti-Semitism wherever we find it, as we must fight all hate offences, crimes and incidents wherever we find them.
Sir Ed David.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for that reply? I hope we will see more action to tackle anti-Semitism. But turning to the Middle East now, Mr. Speaker, the world is looking on in horror at the scenes from Gaza. And now Netanyahu's ministers want to lock the whole population of Gaza into effectively a giant prison. A plan that would clearly amount to ethnic cleansing, as former Israeli Prime Minister Olmert has said. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is utterly abhorrent and unacceptable? And will he make clear to the Israeli government that the UK will not stand idly by and will act, starting by sanctioning Prime Minister Netanyahu himself?
Prime Minister.
Well, I am appalled by these suggestions in relation to Gaza, just as I'm appalled by the reports of yet more civilians being killed whilst trying to access aid. So on both fronts, I'm appalled by what we are seeing and what we're hearing. We raise it regularly, as he would expect. In relation to the civilians being killed, I would expect them to be fully and transparently investigated with full accountability for any failings. And Israel must clearly put in place measures that properly protect civilians in line with international law. And that is the case we're pressing repeatedly. But we do also want to see, and alongside that, an immediate ceasefire so that the remaining hostages can be brought out and aid at volume and at speed can be got in, and a political process opened that, in my view, is the only way we're going to get a lasting solution.
Under back there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, 4-year-old...
That'll do. 16 minutes after 12, we'll be back to pick over the bones of what you have just heard after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:18 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I should begin with an apology. If I don't know, then would it be too outrageous for me to suggest that you probably don't know either? And Keir Starmer said there, and for the record, I thought Kemi Badenoch had quite a good week until the very end. The business confidence in this country was at a 9-year high. I didn't know what he was talking about. And that is a reflection upon the state of the British media, isn't it? Because the first thing I did was check. Confidence levels, Reuters reported 2 weeks ago, among British employers hit a fresh 9-year high this month as companies became more optimistic about the outlook for the economy, according to a survey published on Monday. I don't know the provenance, the Lloyds Bank Business Barometer. Reuters consider it important enough to report. I don't know how widely regarded or respected it is, but it hit the highest mark since November 2015, in other words, since before Brexit, after an 11-point jump in May. There was bad news in April, of course, when Trump introduced the tariffs, which have, of course, many of which have since been suspended. But I honestly didn't know that. And I think, Aggie Chambre, it's fair to say that Kemi Badenoch didn't either. Certainly the people on her benches shouting, "Withdraw, withdraw," would have been completely unaware of it. And that is because all of us, in a way, are victims of the bias in the media in this country. That story has barely, as far as I can tell, seen the light of day. And it took Keir Starmer to bring it to the attention of the population.
Yeah, Keir Starmer obviously had read that report, was quite pleased with that report and thought he'd put that in his back pocket for PMQs.
Can't see it in a single... So Reuters did it, and it was sort of international news on their business. I can't see a single national news for the BBC don't seem to have gone near it. We definitely didn't do it. Maybe the barometer, the Guardian reported in September of last year about business confidence going to its lowest level, but I can't see anything. City AM did it, as perhaps you'd expect. But anyway, there we go. I think you were right, really. The questions he can but can't answer are turning out to be very productive territory for Kemi Badenoch.
I think that's right. And actually, I think it's worth saying as well, because we talked before PMQ started about Afghanistan and how she would probably not talk about that data leak. But I have just read that just before we came onto it, when Sir Keir Starmer was talking before she started asking those questions, he did say something about Afghanistan, and he said that Conservative ministers have serious questions to answer over the handling of the data leak and the subsequent super injunction.
So even she wouldn't go anywhere near it at that point.
No, indeed. But yeah, perhaps unsurprisingly, she went on the economy. She had a slightly different tact this week, but again, basically on tax, talking about growth, how her saying the policies that the government had brought in are bad for growth. He, as he so often does, James, blames the inheritance of the last government, which I think is a reasonable point. They were in power for 14 years. But I do wonder after a year whether that is slightly wearing thin. Which perhaps is unfair of me, because if you're in power for 14 years, it has a long tail, doesn't it? The inheritance, and as proved by yesterday, when we found out about this huge part of the inheritance, which that I should stress they continued and appealed against when the judge tried to end that super injunction. But back to PMQs today, Kemi Badenoch talking about inflation being up again, taxes being up again, talking about his budget last year, and trying to get an answer of what a modest income is. That's after the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, said on Sunday that people on modest incomes would be protected from tax rises. So we're back in that back and forth that we saw so much in the election. What is a working person if these three categories of taxes are protected, national insurance, VAT and income, then what is left? And how is the government going to raise taxes, which it feels at this stage when you speak to people within government and around government, that does feel inevitable for the next budget.
Well, this is what I mean by questions that he can but can't answer, in that they probably don't know yet where the threshold is going to be, or where the inevitable necessity of introducing some new taxes is going to land. So when you're insisting on being told where and when they're going to land, and you can't, then, I mean, you know, to be fair to Kemi Badenoch, the person not answering the question looks bad, even though the person asking it knows that they can't answer it.
I genuinely think that is correct. I think they don't know. I was speaking to a Treasury official last week about whether or not they were going to unfreeze or continue the freeze on income tax thresholds, which previously, you remember, Rachel Reeves had said she was going to unfreeze by 2028. And we had an honest conversation where they basically said, I don't think we know yet. I think they are genuinely trying to work out exactly what they're going to do.
Which would be true of any party, any government.
And any government,
yes.
Exactly. And you know, with budgets, you basically are doing it until the line when you have to, that time period where you have to give it to the Office for Budget Responsibility to score it.
Anything can happen. The day before, Donald Trump might have another sort of brain freeze and announce an enormous tariff on cheese or something, or on everything, on air.
On air. That could happen. Anything could happen. I think that's interesting, because I think that is one of the frustrations with a lot of people that I've spoken to around government about that Donald Trump thing, because they think Rachel Reeves has boxed herself in so successfully with those taxes that I just talked about. And actually, when Donald Trump announced those tariffs initially and came into power, they think that people in government should have said, the world has changed, which they did say. The world has changed so much that we are going to have to change things around. We cannot possibly keep our manifesto commitments, which I think has made things more difficult for them in the first year. So on self-employed too, it's the same argument. Kemi Badenoch asks a self-employed next in line for a tax raid, and Sir Keir Starmer can't answer, which I suspect will be a bit of a story. Why
would the self-employed? I mean, surely it would be about how much the self-employed earned, and you're not going to have a tax that's specific to self-employed people regardless of income.
No,
I didn't understand that question, to be honest.
No, but it's just, I suppose, another category of person that it's impossible at this stage to rule out. I don't think you would just put a
So
tax
it would be the
on
high-earning self-employed people.
Exactly.
But, of course, we can't tell you what high-earning is.
And James, that was the last PMQs before summer.
Good Lord.
Good Lord. So
is it wrong to be a bit relieved?
Yes.
Does that make me a bad person?
Yes.
Okay.
Kemi Badenoch did talk about that. She talked about the scorecard, end-of-term scorecard for the government. Said the economy is contracting, inflation highest in the G7, unemployment up every month under this government, spending out of control, borrowing costs more expensive than Greece, and this is just the first year. And Sir Keir Starmer came back with his own scorecard and said, this is what we're going to be telling constituents. And I thought it was slightly new language for him.
Yes, I did as well.
I don't think he's very good at saying, this is what we've done, this is what we're going to do. And he had quite a comprehensive list. He didn't just mention the NHS appointments that he normally mentions.
That's what I thought when I said that she was going brilliantly until the very end. And then he just took this opportunity to drive home several things that people would have been either unaware of or unexcited by, but which he actually, I think the difference, Aggie, may have been he sounded genuinely enthused by these. He sounded proud of these achievements rather than just offering them up as PMQs fodder. And they were all true.
They were all true. I was speaking to some Labour MPs last night who said, we're done with stage one. I think they were speaking slightly in tongue-in-cheek. We're done with stage one. I said, what's stage one? And they said, start fixing things. And I said, well, what's stage two? And they said, start telling people about it.
Oh,
I said,
okay.
what's stage 3? And they said, become popular again.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
But a couple of people pointing out the comms are bad, but the comms aren't bad on the business confidence thing. You can't force people to print or broadcast stuff, can you? You can't. You can get on the phone and say, "Can you give us a bit of coverage of this?" No one got on the phone to me, so that would be comms are bad.
No, and I didn't get an email about it.
No one saw it. Maybe as I say that the barometer that they've used is not that exciting. I think self-employed people, the changes to national insurance perhaps might be pertinent. A couple of accountants getting in touch with details and explanations that I don't fully understand. And a couple of you pointing out that the reason why I shouldn't be relieved that PMQs is over is that it's proper work for me now. Every Wednesday at 12 noon, I'll have to come up with another topic and do a proper phone-in rather than just getting to knock about with you and Natasha for half an hour. So what's going to come back then? How long are they away for?
So they break up on Tuesday, but I have been told that Monday and Tuesday for the government and for Labour MPs is a one-line whip, which basically means
take the time off.
I'll not be coming in. So,
and how long do they go off? How many weeks? Do we know?
So they come back at the beginning of September, but
Good
then.
grief.
So I am committed to pointing out at this stage they are not now going on holiday for 6 weeks. They are going back to their constituencies, which for many MPs is actually the more difficult work because they have to do lots and lots of casework, although I'm sure lots of them will be taking a holiday at the same time.
And some MPs won't be seen in their constituencies at all, of course. Such is their prerogative. Ed Davey, they're going in on Gaza. It's a bleak vista that he describes where the attention of the nation, the population, the fourth estate, the columnists, the commentators reaches fever pitch when we're talking about the Glastonbury Festival, but the needle barely moves now when we're detailing the latest accounts of people being killed while waiting for the pathetic amounts of aid that are actually available. Davy's sounding very statesmanlike at the moment with every passing week. And again, I stress, I think Badenoch had quite a good week until the end, but the contrast between the two is quite stark sometimes.
I think he has a bit more space. He's able to ask the more difficult questions as the third largest party leader. So he talked about Afghanistan at the beginning, said Sir Keir Starmer will have our support if he chooses to do a public inquiry. Listening to John Healey, as I know you did as well yesterday, it didn't sound like John Healey was minded to introduce a public inquiry, quite the opposite. But that conversation is already beginning. And then, as you say, urging the government to go further on Gaza, saying the Israeli plan for Gaza would amount to putting Palestinians in a prison, would be ethnic cleansing, and suggests the UK should be sanctioning the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sir Keir Starmer responding, the government is appalled by what is happening in Gaza and civilian deaths should be fully investigated. So that is what Sir Keir Starmer has to say on Gaza at the moment. There is actually quite a lot of pressure on him from his own MPs to go further, not just MPs on the left of the party, but other MPs too. I think 60 of his own MPs writing to the Foreign Secretary this week, urging them to recognise Palestine, which is something that they said they would do, but the government saying we're going to do it when it's conducive to the peace process. And I think there is frustration and worry about that on his own side.
He's had quite a good day, Ed Davey, although sadly this is also something that you won't be seeing in any newspapers tomorrow. He criticised the BBC on the BBC for giving Farage such an easy ride. And where else does that happen? I'm trying to think of a broadcast studio in this country other than the BBC where Farage gets an incredibly... No, I've got nothing. Ed Davey saying they need to raise their game to expose him, and he's just 100% correct on that, of course, but I'd be amazed if you see that in any newspapers tomorrow. So that's it then. I've got to come up with some proper topics between now and September at 12 o'clock on a Wednesday.
I'm very happy to come back on midday.
Right. I shall accept all your submissions with enthusiasm and interest. Thank you very much, Aggie. And thank you to Mike in Manchester for drawing my attention to that Ed Davey story, because if I've learned anything today during PMQs, it is that I don't know what's going on sometimes because I can only rely upon the news outlets that exist, and none of them went near that huge rise in business confidence or the high level of business confidence in this country, the highest since 6 months before Brexit. And neither did I know that Ed Davey had been giving the BBC a bit of a schooling in what its job should be when it comes to dealing with people like Nigel Farage. So well done, Ed Davey. Here's Amelia Cox with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 33 minutes after 12, and we return now to territory that we explored up to a point yesterday when we were discussing the case of Constance Martin and the manslaughter of her baby, and the long history of subscription to paranoid conspiracy theories that she had lived with. And I mentioned, not in passing, but I didn't know that he would be joining us today, another story, a truly heartbreaking story of a young woman whose brothers believe is dead as a consequence of their mother's brainwashing and subscription to conspiracy theories. I speak of Paloma Shemirani, who was 23 years old when she died last year following a cancer diagnosis. Her twin, Gabriel, is with me now, and you and your brother Sebastian have both been trying to get your side of the story into the public space, Gabriel, because it is your conviction that the decision to refuse NHS recommended treatment was a consequence of your mother's intervention. And I've only learned relatively recently that this behaviour goes deep into your childhood, when you were sort of encouraged to believe all sorts of things, like the Rothschilds would be coming to take you away when you were 10 years old. But let's begin with Paloma's diagnosis and perhaps the question of how she ended up falling under your mother's spell again, as you would have it.
So I think it's one of those ones where, as much as you can be estranged from someone, at pressure points, like when you get ill, like my sister did, it's when you're at your most vulnerable. So in the case of my sister, she was estranged from my mother at the point of her diagnosis, and she informed her, merely as a courtesy, if anything. And for my mum, she realised that could be her time to sort of to make those moves to essentially try and model my sister as a Belle Gibson type and as a sort of poster girl. So I know when my sister told my mum that she had cancer, my mum actually said to her, it's because you left me, this is all your fault, I'm the only one that can cure you. So I guess sort of giving a quick explanation as to how she could do it. She sees her when she was in a moment of sort of weakness and fear, and my mum also leveraged the abusive dynamics which had characterised her relationship with Paloma from her sort of childhood. And me and my brother have spoken about this a little bit as well, where people always, when people are thinking of emotional or emotional abuse, they always just think of it in the sort of more classical, like long terms of, they call me names. Whereas I feel, especially with the advent and the mainstream of conspiracy theory narratives, there's sort of a new kind of abuse of this conspiracy theory abuse, where it's telling you that everyone else is wrong, everyone else is out to get you, and you're the only one that can protect them. And it almost operates like a cult, but like in a more sort of micro, smaller sense. And it provides it provides an explanation to the victim as to why they have to be cut off from everyone else.
And your mum achieved public prominence, really, during the pandemic. I mentioned yesterday that she was one of the first to use Nazi comparisons to doctors and nurses who were treating people. That isn't... I mean, that's the first that we heard of her. Your experiences and Paloma's and your brother's experiences go back presumably almost as far as you can remember. When did you... I don't know what phrase to use. What do you prefer? Wise up? Wake up? When did you...
So I think it was... So as long as I can remember, my dad was into conspiracy theories. From even being a little child, he was obviously very sympathetic to the 9/11 conspiracy theories, the slightly more mainstream conspiracy theories, the JFK ones, the 7/7 ones. And my mum had a sympathy for them, but it was more her personality was a kind of personality that would gravitate eventually towards conspiracy theories because they made her feel important. So it was when she got cancer in around 2012. She had conventional treatment to essentially cure herself of the cancer. She had a double mastectomy. But I think afterwards she realised that she couldn't model herself like one of these Jess Ainscoffs or Belle Gibson.
For people who don't know, who are Jess Ainscoff and Belle Gibson?
So Jess Ainscoff and Belle Gibson, I believe, are both Australian. So Jess Ainscoff also got cancer and also did the Gerson therapy. And for a period, she was an alternative wellness influencer until her cancer actually returned and eventually killed her. And then Belle Gibson is another one in that space. I believe is more fraudulent and lied a bit more. So I think there's a TV show called Apple Cider Vinegar, which covers a lot of the Mel Gibson story.
And your mum was in that space. Gerson therapy includes is the idea that juices, coffee, enemas, and a vegan diet, as well as supplements, can cure cancer. These things offer an alternative to conventional treatment, or treatment, as we should probably call it. I just briefly, before we return to your sister's experiences, what outsiders don't get is the fact that this is believed and not believed at the same time. Is that the correct way of putting it? I mean, your mum really believes this stuff, otherwise she wouldn't have jeopardised your sister's life, or is that a too simplistic a reading of the...
I feel that the correct reading is people view belief in a very sort of...
binary,
very sort of technical way.
Yes.
So when you and me talk about belief, we take that to mean we've looked at both sides of the aisle and we've assessed the facts, and we think which one is more logical. The way my mum's beliefs work is a deeply more narcissistic way of determining beliefs. She chooses beliefs not by the objective facts, by which one makes her feel the most important. As with a lot of conspiracy theorists, or even cult leaders, they choose their beliefs on which places me close enough to power, which places me close enough to this idea of importance. So I think when she's determining a belief, there's no urge in her to critically evaluate it, because to critically evaluate a belief which makes her feel important, it's then start critically evaluating her own ego, and I believe she's far too narcissistic to do that.
Wow.
So with my...
That makes sense, actually. I mean, it's bleak, but it does actually... I mean, it holds logical consistency, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think, if we're talking, does my mum believe this? Not in the typical way someone believes it, and it's just, I think she believes it. I guess she believes it in the sense I've described to a point.
Yeah.
But even then, I think she's also she prefers to sacrifice people on this altar of her ideology, as opposed to actually questioning herself and saying whether it's right. So with my sister, I'm sure, and I've seen evidence to support this, that she was aware that my sister's condition was deteriorating. But I think for my mum, it was too much of an emotional loss to admit that she was wrong and her treatment hadn't worked. So I think it's, as psychopathic as it sounds, I think she preferred to save face than save daughter, if that makes sense.
When did you begin to panic yourself? When did you? I mean, between the diagnosis and Paloma's death, you must have put two and two together.
For me, I started panicking the minute I heard that my sister
was back in your mother's orbit.
Had been pressured to reject treatment, because this was a very treatable cancer, but it was a high grade, fast growing cancer. And I'm not one of these ones to try and trick myself into thinking she's going to be okay. So in my mind, I thought if I don't do anything, her death is going to be imminent. So from December to when she died in July, I was in a constant state of concern and worried that I was going to get that phone call from my lawyers saying your sister's unfortunately died. And in July, I did get that phone call, unfortunately.
So you couldn't make contact with her either? You'd been sort of...
I was cut off first, because I made my...
What was that like, Gabriel? She's your twin. That must have been unbearable.
I mean, it was incredibly difficult. But then also in the sense that I wasn't surprised that my mum had done it. It's the kind of modus operandi of a lot of these conspiracy theorists. So it wasn't something that was, that shocked me necessarily. I think for me, it gave me all the more urgency to do whatever I could to try and get my sister to be able to make a decision on the treatment that would cure her.
So I mean, it's such a cocktail of vulnerability, isn't it, on Paloma's part? Because everyone loves their mum, regardless of what their mum has done to them. And the diagnosis compounds that vulnerability, and also a desperation, perhaps, to believe whatever it was she was being told, because it was preferable in that moment to the truth, if not to the science.
I think with a lot of these kind of cases, the more and more I talk to people, and the some more experts I talk to, there seems to be a very clear, like, Munchausen's by proxy element to a lot of these cases. So I think in my the complex thing with my sister's case is, she'd had a very poor relationship with my mother, and she, I guess in the way many daughters do, they just want their mother's approval, love, and care. Yeah. So at the beginning, my mum was able to dangle that in front of her, but then also simultaneously convince her that it's a sort of weird, almost contradictory kind of thing that a lot of these alternative therapists do, where they'll say, we're definitely going to cure you, we're definitely going to live. However, everything else around you is dangerous. So it's this, I'm the only one that can save you, and everything else is out to kill you. So it necessitates this complete control. So I remember one of the last messages I exchanged with my sister, I was asking to meet her, and she said, like, oh, I'd love to, but our mum said I shouldn't be outside too much right now because of the bad air. So my mum had convinced her that the damp air was bad for her. Which obviously there's no scientific backing for that, and I'm confident that my mum also knew that wasn't true. She just, my mother just loved trying to get as much control as she could, so she was willing to.
I think she claimed that the phone itself was making her ill because her face was red, and that was part of how she managed to alienate to keep her away from you and your brother. Exactly. So I'm sure she used that to say, oh, you can't call Anders, Sebastian, or Gabriel too much. So yeah, there's stuff which I guess my mum does believe in a sense, but then there's also stuff which she clearly doesn't, but she realises is just too good enough an opportunity to garner control. Another almost unbearable element to all of this is the fact that you were fighting a legal case to get Paloma in front of a doctor when she passed. Yeah, so you knew exactly what the stakes were. Yeah, so I was fighting a high court case to get my sister's treatment assessed, and it wasn't me trying to force chemotherapy on my sister. It was me being able to give my sister the proper room to be able to make a decision free from coercion and the control of my mother. So the only reason I found out that my sister had in fact died was because the hospital had informed the local social services, which then informed the court, which then informed my lawyers. So I was then informed 7 days after my sister's death that my sister had passed away. So the responsibility fell on me. I'm sorry. I mean, it wasn't obviously not the best way to find out, but I think for me, there's not much point on me lamenting the difficulties that I faced, because I think for me it's the most important thing is to kind of use that to stop it from happening to other people. Yeah. And that's the mission that you and your brother are on now. I presume that attending the funeral was out of the question as well for you and him. So the funeral was actually hidden from us. So she was cremated by someone whose name I won't reveal in Milton Keynes without my knowledge. And the man who cremated her without my knowledge has actually appeared on RFK Jr.'s podcast. So he's been interviewed by RFK himself. Which for me, when I realised it, it was kind of a bit of a shock, but there was also the sort of, wow, this is such a small world. Like, the alternative health world is so small that something as tragic and, needs another name, doesn't it? Alternative health. It's bogus health. I know, it's false health. I think I said with your colleague Ben Kentish, I'd refer to it as alternative voodoo. Because there we go. Yeah. Health or treatment implies that there's some kind of science behind it or some kind of study. It does, and there isn't. Whereas with this, there's more of just kind of this religious, pseudo-religious, natural, energy. So you get it, and don't get it at the same time. You have an intellectual understanding of how it can happen, but you have an emotional repulsion of when it does. So with alternative treatments, all of this stuff, all of this sort of cultish brainwashing. So it's this weird. It's the weirdest thing where essentially because obviously I grew up with this. So up until the age of 14, 15, you kind of swallow a lot of this and you see it as, I guess, true because you don't think too deeply about it. And also you're quite young, so you're more impressionable. But for me, as I interacted with the world more, as I studied more, you kind of realise how stupid it is and how wrong it is. But then you're also able to, I think the benefit that me and my brother have is we're able to self-reflect on the growing up. So we're able to self-reflect on what made us fall into it, what was the motifs that we believed, and what is the stuff that sticks in your head that stops you from questioning it or completely detoxing yourself of it. So I think that's the reason that we have such an understanding of it is because obviously we've lived it. So then, but we also understand how reverse engineered it. Almost. Exactly, you understand how someone can live it. Got it. I think for a lot of people who see conspiracy theories from an outside perspective, it can be quite difficult to be like, how do people think and believe these views? Yeah, and that's really important. If you're going to undo the damage that's being done, you have to understand how it operates and how it works in the first place. I need to read out a statement that your mother and father have made previously, just for obvious reasons. Before I do that, what are your feelings towards your mother? With my mother,
it's just like a kind of dispassionate need to exact criminal justice on her. I think for me hate's not the right word, because hate implies that you see them sort of like as there's quite a personal element to hatred.
Sure.
Whereas I feel with my mother, it's almost, I feel so removed from her that for me she's just an incredibly malicious actor. So in the same way that I see, I guess like a historical figure who does really evil stuff, it's now like weirdly that's how I see my mother, because I feel removed from her. So I now just see her as someone that caused the death of my sister, but also someone that caused and has caused and will cause death to many other people through propagating her ideas, but also like offering treatment to people who also are in the same situation as my sister.
These are, of course, accusations she would deny, and in a statement that they have both said, Kate and your father, Dr. Faramarz Shemirani.
Can I just add in with
of course you can.
With the Dr. Faramarz Shemirani? So I just want to clear this up. She leaves vague what my dad's PhD is, so a lot of people fall into the trap of thinking that my dad's a medical doctor. My dad is by no means a medical doctor. He's a doctor of, he's a PhD in computational fluid dynamics, so engineering to you and me. So I just wanted to clarify that, because they probably left
well,
that
let's read out the statement from Kate and Faramarz Shemirani in that case. Our daughter died following a chain of gross medical failings, breaches of consent law, falsified medical records, and reckless emergency drug use that violated every protocol for her age, weight, and clinical presentation. Claims that are all easily checked. They rejected any suggestion that they influenced or endangered Paloma's life, and said she was never coerced or radicalised. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And sorry, so sorry, on behalf of everybody listening to this, for your loss.
Yeah.
Gabriel Shemirani, thank you. The time now is 12:51.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:53 is the time, and as is our wont now on Wednesdays, I have another guest for you. And this is an extraordinary book, Inheritocracy. It's time to talk about The Bank of Mum and Dad by Eliza Filby. Blows the lid off some of the things that we've been nibbling at the edges on this programme now for a number of years. Eliza, what is the central... Why do we need to start talking about the Bank of Mum and Dad?
Inheritocracy is a deliberately provocative title. The idea that we're living in a society now where it's not what you're earning anymore because wages have stalled since 2008. It's not what you're learning anymore because the investment, particularly on a degree, has declined. It's whether you have access to the Bank of Mum and Dad, which is defining opportunity, particularly for the under 45s. Whether you can get on the housing ladder, whether you can afford your education, whether you can actually live it through the cost of living crisis.
We took a call. This is what made me think of you. We took a call from a fella who was able to buy a house because of his parents, but his boss wasn't, because his boss only had their income. And that's exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's really important to understand that you're more likely to get on the housing ladder, not from a bonus at work, but from a gift from your parents.
So what it does is lay siege to the whole relationship between hard work and success. And it's happening like a boiled frog. It's happening really without us noticing. If you're on the right side of this divide, you'll put some effort, with the exception of our caller and some others, into acknowledging the serendipity, the pure luck that's playing a part. But it's a lot easier, a lot more attractive to think that it's all a consequence of your own unique set of skills and an exceptional work ethic, which is nonsense. It's not.
I think we like to think we live in a meritocracy, and clearly we don't. And it has been this kind of silent economic force, really, for the last 2 decades. Parental gifting, that's giving before you die, obviously, has tripled in the last 2 decades. It's now at 10 billion a year. And so we have this at a time when, really since 2008, the state retracted and the market, particularly in housing, but also childcare and education, became more dysfunctional. Who do you rely on? If you can, and I stress if you can, your parents.
And what parent will say no? I mean, that's the other impulse is to actually do what is damaging the fabric of society.
Yeah, but it's also an economic reality, that we have a disproportionate amount of wealth in the older generations. It used to...
Well, that leads me to, because we're short of time, you write as a historian, but you also write almost as a diarist. You bring a lot of yourself to these pages.
It's a memoir.
It is a memoir. One reviewer has likened you to Dolly Alderton, which for people familiar with her work is a pretty nice compliment, particularly when you marry it to The Economist, like a mashup between Dolly Alderton and The Economist. So what's see the thesis, I can see the antithesis. What's the synthesis? What is the answer? What are we going to do? How do we fix it?
Well,
Can we?
It's It's a memoir because we need to start talking about it. I couldn't write about inheritance without talking about my own parental support that I received. We need to talk about it within society, within our friendship groups, and we also need to talk about it with our parents, because actually the social care bill is coming down the road very quickly. It's a can that the government has kicked down the road. We need to talk not just about how parents have helped us, but how we in an ageing society are going to have to help our parents. So the solution is, let's really flesh out how much we're dependent on parental support, how much a divide it's clearly marking between those that have it and those that don't. And let's generate an economy that is built not on taxing wages, but ultimately really interrogating how we tax wealth.
Oh, gosh, so very timely. I mean, the hardback was a sleeper hit, wasn't it? It was
a Sunday Times top 10 bestseller.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But it was a small publishing
People
house.
want to know about this stuff.
That's what I'm interested in. Do politicians greet you with open arms, or...?
Not really, because it's quite critical of the last sort of 14 years of Tory government, and
it has to be.
Quite critical about what the options are. We have to face some serious truths about public finances. We have to face some serious truths also about intergenerational inequality, and also some serious truths about whether we live in a meritocracy anymore.
And the book gives you everything you need to conduct these conversations, also with sceptics and naysayers, and with family members and friends who you want to kind of...
Well, I think we like a rose-tinted view of our past and how hard we've worked and how little we've had a leg up. Actually, a lot of us have, and we need to be more honest about that.
It was so funny. The first time it happened on this programme was 15 years ago, and it was just a simple question of someone ringing in to say the reason why your generation can't buy houses is because you spend all your money on Netflix subscriptions and avocado toast. And we just went through the numbers. I mean, it's the simple... I mean, it's second nature to you, but it's amazing how many people feel the penny drop when you say, well, what were you earning when you bought your first house? Okay, and how much was the first house? Okay, and what's the division? If we divide the total of the house by the annual income, what's the factor? What's the 3 times your income, was it? And what is it now? About 30? Hello?
And I think the point is actually, that was maybe, what did you say, 2014? A long time ago, right? I do think the conversation has changed. I think a lot of people over 50 now are kind of glad they bought a house when they did.
Yeah, and a lot of parents are beginning to recognise that what they're handing over to their children isn't necessarily optimal.
Yeah, and 25% of grandparents help first-time buyers, their grandchildren. Grandparents. So we talk about the bank of mum and dad. What about the bank of grandma and granddad?
Buy this book. Go out and buy it now. The hardback was a bestseller. Let's make sure that the paperback was as well. Inheritocracy. It's time to talk about the bank of mum and dad with Eliza Filby. I don't normally have experts on this programme, but next time we are in territory like this, come back and talk to us a little more, because we were very squeezed for time today. Eliza, thank you. That's it from me for another day. If you missed any of the show, you can listen back. It was a mad show as well, wasn't it? You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player and the LBC app. I was going to do some more tree puns in my handover to Sheila Fogarty, but on reflection, I feel it would be unprofessional. You can stay up to date. You can I can't think of any now. Oh yes, I've got one. You can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions. Put your news categories in the order you want. You can even pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcast.
That was such a dad joke.
Was it? Download the official LBC app for Tree from your app store now.
What was the name of that guy with the fez?
Tommy Cooper.
Tommy Cooper.
You see this? This one does the same.
Never made me laugh once in my life. Not you, Tommy Cooper. Puns don't make me laugh. I'm dead to them. I'm dead to them. I don't know what it is about me, but I'm dead to them.
James O'Brien on LBC.